Chapter 1. Death, Ascension, Reincarnation. Elliot stared at the sterile white ceiling as he struggled for each labored breath. The incessant beeping of the machine that was barely keeping him alive seemed louder than usual. Ever since his lung cancer diagnosis, he had lived each day battling the merciless disease, clinging to the hope that he might prevail. But for those who could not afford it, hope could be a dangerous thing to cling to. And Elliot was realizing it quite early in life. He blamed it all on his workplace. As an esteemed engineer and valedictorian, intelligence was an understatement of his brilliant and creative mind. But he had been naive, falling for the wrong woman and working under her ruthless father. Her father had been excavating gold from a perilous site and had needed to hide the operation. So, building an oil rig provided the perfect cover, and while it was under construction, the gold could be hastily extracted without arousing suspicion. Elliot's ingenious mind had been exploited throughout the whole charade. Like a tool, he had been used completely and then discarded by both his girlfriend and her father. Just 7 months into working there, Elliot had been diagnosed with lung cancer, though its origins remained unclear. Shortly after, his girlfriend left him, and her father erased his existence. All of Elliot's life savings went towards desperately trying to battle the cancer. That fight now seemed profoundly foolish. He should have surrendered from the very beginning. Gritting his teeth, Elliot resentfully replayed it all in his mind. Why had he been cursed with such misfortune? Why couldn't the world be a better place? As Elliot felt the remaining life drain from his body, he forced himself to release his bitter hatred. At least he didn't want to die and become a lingering, wandering spirit. If I die now, I wish I could start over in a better world. He knew it was pure fantasy, impossible in reality. But as death approached, such thoughts preoccupied his mind. Ever since he started chemotherapy, Elliot had developed a love for novels and comics about characters who died, awakened, and became reincarnated in other worlds. Why not indulge in a bit of fairy tale? He was a dying man after all. Cut him some slack. Elliot smiled slightly, losing himself in fanciful daydreams of life beyond this one. Baseless and fleeting, such musings would simply scatter like dust when death's candle blew out his flame. Yet, for now, imagining another chance is what kept the faint smile on his face. The machine's beeping slowed. Nurses rushed in as doctors desperately tried to save him. Charging to 120 joules. Clear. Beep. Charging to 150 joules. Clear. Beep. Their efforts faded into the background as Elliot's smile faded into a lifeless one. His eyes glazed over as desperate chaos unfolded around his corpse. With a last failed jolt of electricity, the doctor conceded defeat, dropping the defibrillators. Time of death, 3:04 p.m. Peace at last, or so Elliot assumed. Where was this place? He wondered to himself. He couldn't feel his body, just an orb-like essence. Strange glowing orbs traversed a vast expanse of white roads leading toward different portals. Curious, he wondered, what are those things? Those, my friend, are souls. A masculine voice replied unexpectedly. Elliot tried glancing upwards but could only see about 90 degrees above. Then, without willing it, his orb floated up toward the source of the voice. What met his gaze was someone, or rather, something too perfect to be mortal. Flowing silver locks framed striking yet sage features with flawless symmetry. Garbed in ornate floral fabrics. Everything about this being oozed cunning intellect and absolute authority. He had a divine, terrible beauty. "Hello, odd one," he murmured while closely scrutinizing the soul in his palm. "Never have I encountered a soul so curious about other souls." He twirled his fingers, blue sparks dancing around them. Then his eyes shot wide. "Oh my!" His mouth fell open in astonishment. An ear-to-ear grin stretched across his face. "In 3,000 years, never did I expect to discover such a rare treasure," he shouted joyously, giddily tossing the soul up and catching it. Thoroughly perplexed, Elliot wished the exuberant stranger would explain what was happening instead of throwing him around like a ball. But before Elliot could question anything, The being conjured a portal with a swirl of his finger. I'm sending you somewhere exciting, but given the urgency, explanations will have to wait. I promise to give you help and answers soon. Laughing, he hurtled Elliot's soul towards the shimmering portal. But in the final moments, an external force knocked his trajectory off course, sending him tumbling down endless glowing pathways. The man whipped around furiously. How dare you? He spat. You'd be stupid to think that I'd let you have your way, trickster. A wispy female voice retorted. An ancient, diminutive woman leaned on a cane, seemingly materializing from thin air. Meddlesome hag, the man hissed. What could you possibly know? She shrugged indifferently. I know nothing, but that soul's not going back to you. Cackling. Her entire presence exuded a mischievous, cunning aura. The man glared at the sea of souls and then smirked coldly. Foolish old crone, have you forgotten that I am the god of deceit? No matter where he lands, I will find him. Meanwhile, Elliot's soul continued falling further down the glittering cosmic maze. Then, after a few more aimless tumbles, he landed on an empty, isolated path. Gazing around, Elliot saw no other souls. He couldn't fly or climb back up the brilliant white web. But directly ahead lay an open portal. Ominous yet enticing, it offered the only way forward. Against his better judgment, Elliot entered the ominous gate. His vision faded into darkness. Muddled sounds of chaotic chatter and a woman's pained screams filtered through. Push! Push, my lady! Push! It felt arduous, oppressive. Then Elliot felt himself being pulled out by a strong force both inside and outside. With cold dread, he suddenly understood. Oh crap! Chapter 2, Child of Prophecy. Elliot realized two things the moment he emerged from the young woman's womb. 1. He wasn't being born in some metropolitan hospital. They weren't even indoors. 2. The lives of the people currently around him were in grave peril. He couldn't see or hear very clearly, but he could at least discern the urgency in their voices. What had gone wrong? What was amiss? Why were these people in such a flurry? He received no answers to those questions, though. He was swaddled in the clothes of the lady who had just given birth to him and placed in some bushes. Don't worry, my lady. I'm sure the young prince will be safe. Astrid will protect him. We will come back for him. But we cannot afford to lose you. The ladies cried out to the young woman as she strained to reach for her child. She was pale and exhausted, looking like she might perish at any moment. Yet she struggled vehemently to reach for her infant but was restrained by the other ladies who had assisted her in the successful delivery. A man in a ceremonial garb suddenly arrived, his face rugged but hinting at an experienced warrior. We must depart immediately. We cannot linger any longer. The ladies nodded toward him. He stepped forward, and his hands moved swiftly, striking the young woman's neck. All her strength vanished as she lost consciousness. Then he lifted her in his arms. Please, you must ensure Her Highness is protected. We will stay and safeguard the young prince. Do not fret, we shall shield him at the cost of our lives. They vowed to the man. With a curt nod, he took flight, disappearing into the distance. The young ladies, 3 of them, regarded each other with bittersweet smiles. They turned to the infant concealed in the bushes, silent and observant with sea-blue eyes and a strange curiosity etched on his face. Their hearts seemed to flutter as they gazed upon him one last time. Child of the prophecy, we the Triad sisters will gladly surrender our lives to protect you, the one in the middle said. Her face was worn from scars and strain, and stained with blood here and there. Her brunette hair was braided into a ponytail, and her eyebrows were thick. She leaned closer and used her finger to draw an arc on the boy's forehead, then did the same to her own. The other 2 followed suit. Stay protected, young one. She closed her palms together and chanted something inaudibly. Immediately, the grasses grew and intertwined, completely enveloping the infant within their embrace. Then she looked at her sisters, and all 3 nodded before running out of the bush. They ran as far away from the baby as they could until they reached a narrow road. Unfortunately, the moment they did, someone, or rather something, tore through the very space before. They froze in fear, unable to move as the creature, oozing black smoke, revealed itself. It was fully shrouded in black metallic armor, the only visible area being the visor, which glinted with a malicious crimson light that flowed like traces of fire. It dragged a large, thorned sword behind it. The three sisters shook with terror as the creature regarded them. It paused and tilted its head slightly. Then the next second, it vanished, reappearing behind them in the blink of an eye. It swung its sword upward, inflicting a crude gash on the back of the nearest sister. The brunette quickly joined her hands and began to mutter, but the creature's metal-clad hand entered her mouth and tore it apart. It immediately grasped the third one by the neck, raised her, and plunged its thorned sword into her belly, her internal organs spilling forth. The woman let out a shrill scream as the dark being twisted its sword, her eyes widening and nearly popping out of their sockets, even as they became void and lifeless. The creature dropped her and turned to the brunette whose mouth it had torn, but she was nowhere to be found. Unfazed, it turned around to inspect its surroundings, and upon detecting a trail of blood, shot forward like a whistling arrow. The lady was doing her utmost, running while clutching her torn jaw together. However, blood dripped between her fingers, down her throat, and onto the ground. She was in immense agony, but she didn't stop. She had to lead the creature as far away from the infant as she could. That was the entire essence of this plan. Her face held such determination, even though her jaw was hanging loose. She kept running and running, but no amount of running could have been enough to outrun the dark night. It appeared before her, emerging from the wind, and swung its sword horizontally. With the sound of the crude blade slicing through the air, the lady's head flew into the embrace of the dark skies and toppled to the ground. Her headless body crumbled. The knight stood motionless for a few minutes, then turned its head around to check if any other creature had survived. After a while, it vanished into thin air. The moon gave way to the sun, and soon morning arrived, the bright light of day accompanied by a cold rain that drenched the entire forest. The leaves basked in the downpour, washing away the crimson gore that had been spilled the night before. The forest seemed serene, as if nothing eventful had occurred, and the bodies of the ladies became submerged in the water, carried away by the low stream caused by the downpour. A couple who should have been ensconced in their home, reveling in the morning, were instead running in the rain, their soft tunics drenched. The woman was a blonde with a slender body, her skin smooth, and her face like the glimmering rays of a saintess, with a golden eye that bestowed her with so much grace. The man she danced with in the rain was a young, muscular soldier, bearing a scar over his nose that did not detract from the shine of his red eyes. His curly hair was wet from the rain, and his entire demeanor, though free-spirited, was imbued with the aura of a battle-hardened warrior. Together they played in the rain and ran around, filling the cold embrace of the forest with so much love. The lady drew the young man to her, kissing him passionately as she shivered in the cold. His hands enveloped her for a moment, then lifted her, before slowly laying her down. The rain poured down relentlessly, yet these two seemed not to care. The man slowly undid the laces of her tunic, a cocky grin on his face, while she watched him carefully, observing his actions. After fully opening her tunic, he was about to unbutton his own shirt when both of them heard a strange sound.
Chapter 3. Ultrael.
They both froze, exchanging puzzled glances. "You heard that too?" the Golden Beauty asked.
Her lover grinte roguishly.
"I definitely did. Perhaps we're so eager for a baby that we're hearing things." She frowned. "No, it sounded quite arie." The man interrupted her with a kiss, then added with a crooked smile, "It must be our future children announcing themselves," his hands suggestively caressing her rain-slicked body. "Making love here will surely bless us. But dear, we've tried everywhere, the mall, rooftops, even bars. You said the same thing each time." His smile only widened at her complaint. "Yet, did we hear a babe those other times?" Biting her lip, she shook her head.
No.
The man broke into a grin at her response. Then are you still doubting me now? She sighed and shrugged. I guess we just have to see for ourselves then. Her reluctance shifted to sultry heat as she wrapped slender arms around his thick neck, pulled his face to hers, and began kissing him hungrily. Her long legs also snaked around his muscular waist. Meanwhile, these bastards are really having a go at it. Huh. How about I watch a little and just when he is about to put it inside, I scream the whole place down. At least that had been Elliot's plan, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. The impulse to scream was strangely something he had no control over. He had been exposed to the cold for an entire night. He felt like his lungs were going to freeze up, and all he wanted to do was just let out a deafening cry and disturb the entire world. Maybe this was what babies usually had to do to feel heard. Although he wanted to hold it in and enjoy what he was watching, his impulse won. A loud cry escaped the cluster of grass next to them, startling the couple. Oh, bless Eldek. It wasn't all in our heads. Shin, it's a baby, the young lady exclaimed while her husband withdrew, his face heavy with disappointment. She adjusted her clothes, covered her breasts, and shifted towards the grass beside them, digging through it with her hands. Her eyes suddenly grew wide as she felt something. She wrapped her hands gently around it and pulled it out, only for her eyes to widen even more. Her husband also moved towards her, adjusting the strap of his trousers and tightening it. Wow, it's really a baby, and it wasn't just in our heads, he repeated. She took the baby in her arms, her eyes shining with so much emotion. This Silk, her husband intoned. I'm guessing her parents are really rich? Nobility, perhaps. What do we do? She turned her gleaming eyes to her husband, grasping the baby tightly in her arms. Shin looked at his wife for a few seconds, the way her eyes were looking at him. No! He shook his head. No, we can't do that, love. Come on. Do you know what might have happened to her parents? We should look for a way to find her parents, not keep her. We can't keep her. Dear, it's a boy. You keep saying her. She corrected her husband with a giggle. And how exactly can you tell? Can't you see her eyes? Her white hair? What boy has such beautiful eyes? He retorted. All right then. How about we make a bet? Shin narrowed his eyes. You are going to use a bet to have it your way? Okay then, you're lost because I'm very sure this little one here is a girl. I mean, look at her eyes. If it's a girl, we look for her parents and let it all go. But if it's a boy, we get to keep him and I raise him as my son and never mention the origin of his parents. Not to him or anyone else. All right then. Shin grinned. He was so sure that the baby was a girl. Then carefully both of them pulled down the silk that was covering the baby. Immediately they did. A sprinkle of liquid shot into the face of the husband, persisting for a while and before lowering. The baby giggled and jerked his leg with joy as he saw how he had soaked the young man's face with his pee. Oh, he's got a little Winnie here, his wife said happily, playing with his little thing. Elliot felt like he was being defiled but could not say anything, while Shin looked dejected. Seriously, what boy has beautiful eyes like his? He grumbled but soon went silent, and watched the way his wife adored the little baby, the beautiful look in her eyes as she gently swung him in her arms. After a short while he spoke. We will keep him, but should we discover who his parents are, please Aisha, let's not withhold anything and give him back. She looked at her husband, sparks of joy dancing in her eyes. Yes, I promise. We will. Well then, what should we name him? Shin inquired, looking into the child's enchanting blue eyes. You give him a name. You are his father. Shin thought for a while, looking around the forest. Then an idea suddenly struck him. Northern. What about Northern? Since he was found in this northern forest, we can honor the forest for giving us a child. Aisha's expression contorted a little. She didn't look too sure about that name. Oh, well, I don't know. Northern sounds unique, Shin added on her behalf. Seeing the glow in his eyes, she yielded. All right, fine. Northern it is, she answered, rolling her eyes. And that was how Elliot was found by a strange countryside couple and began his life as Northern. For the past 14 years, Northern had grown both in wisdom and social detachment. Perhaps it was a consequence of his tumultuous past life. But he became aloof, coexisting with other children but never truly connecting with them. Maintaining the facade of childhood was his greatest challenge, as he didn't want his parents to fret unnecessarily. It was a delicate balancing act. At the tender age of 3, Northern began to learn about the language of his new world, beginning with its name, Ultrael or Trael, depending on the alphabetical arrangement. This name bore within it the essence of the world's history. Under the tutelage of his father's hired tutor, Northern's initial lessons revolved around the lore of Trael. It was believed that Trael came into existence through a cataclysmic burst of soul energy, birthing expansive landscapes and oceans, and outlining the heavens from the earth in a divine spectacle. Everything about Trael exuded beauty, and notably, it possessed a voice, all capable of conversing with all its denizens. However, 3 millennia ago, an anomaly disrupted this idyllic world. Interdimensional worlds, rifts, first clawed their way into Trael's fabric. These gaping gash in space linked Trael to chaotic parallel realms. During the first rift's emergence, humanity had been ill-prepared, and after a fortnight, the spatial rupture birthed grotesque monstrosities that ravaged human life. In the ensuing chaos, the first awakened individuals, imbued with extraordinary powers, emerged as pillars of hope, obliterating the abominations and heralding humanity's resurgence. These gifted beings, initially revered as gods, eventually became known as drifters, as more individuals awakened to formidable talents and were drawn inexorably into the rift's beckoning call. Through resonance with Ul's fundamental voice, these gifted beings transformed into living weapons, burning away the encroaching shadow. As the voice guided them into the rifts, they took the fight directly to the enemy rather than await passive slaughter. Through soul-rending trials, their mythic crusade ultimately made things a little bit bearable. From the moment Northern first heard of drifters, he resolved to become one, eagerly anticipating his own awakening. The call itself remained beyond willful control. He knew too well. Hearing Ul's voice marked a soul-scouring first awakening, a terrifying metamorphosis into a more elemental version of oneself. Ul would forge a soul core within a person, an internal crucible to contain the even greater energies of the second awakening. Only by answering a rift portal's call could that ultimate power be unlocked, along with one's talents, attributes, and dimensional name. Awakening typically happened between ages 15 and 19. Northern was turning 15 in a few months. He was anxious to form his soul core and experience the call. In this forest patrolled by 2 wane moons, one a mere crescent skulking amidst the high clouds, the other bathing the woodland with unsettling intensity, Northern silently accompanied his adoptive father through the darkened wilderness while the man rode his steed, lost in thought. Shin didn't glance back until he suddenly halted and dismounted in a single well-practiced motion. "Come, climb up," he brusquely ordered Northern. Scowling bitterly, Northern realized Shin only just now recalled his son, walking the entire distance alone. How typically self-absorbed. While the man clearly excelled combat-wise, common courtesy escaped him. Still, fellow villagers deemed Shin a consummate warrior. His lethal skill was beyond question. Through repeated clashes against monstrosities, did Northern begrudgingly agree that his father was or used to be a drifter. The man proved cunning in battle despite his staggering obliviousness outside it. To think they called such a person a master. Northern muttered derisively while clambering awkwardly atop the horse's saddle behind his father. Masters were revered mainly because they had reached the level where it was possible for them to resist the call of the rift. Of course, they still had to go into the rift to challenge the hardships brought by other dimensions should they want to grow. But they were well distinguished by their skill alone and were formidable warriors. As they proceeded, Shin repeatedly stole glances at his son, as if anxious to voice some revelation before thinking better of it each time. This performance swiftly exhausted Northern's patience. "What troubles you, father?" he asked pointedly. "Nothing, my son. No, there's nothing wrong. I'm just thinking about it. But if it so happens that your talent has to do with something about being a martial arts genius, our lives would literally change. Northern looked at him, then averted his gaze. Is that so? How exactly? He asked with a bored expression on his face. What could his father say that he didn't already know? The kids in the village talked about it all day long. Shin began immediately. His son asked. As you know, talents are of different perks. There are some kinds of talent that you'll awaken that will open doors to an explosive growth rate for you, and there are some that would just make you stagnant. Like yours. Northern, you will not insult my talent. It's an impressive one. You think it's child's play for me to be a master. Northern looked at the excited man with a blank face. Masters were vagrant rank drifters, who were not affected by the strong call of the rift. The young man, no matter how stupid he looked, used to be an amazing drifter. Anyways, son, what I'm saying is you could even become a knight and be earning thousands of gold coppels. You know? Yeah, but we can't really tell for sure. And talents are not supposed to manifest until 15. I'm just 14, remember? Well, you'll be 15 in a few months. You might be one of those early bloomers. Shin ascertained. Whatever. But don't get your hopes up too high, father. Northern had his reasons for speaking that way. Despite his father's optimism, Northern remained pragmatic, mindful of the uncertainty surrounding talent manifestation. He harbored doubts about his own potential, wary of the possibility of disappointment. After all, for Elliot, hope had proven itself to be a precarious notion. He had learned the hard way not to cling to it too fervently, lest it betray him. A lesson instilled in him by the hardships of his past. Chapter 4. Out of luck. Get my hopes up? No matter the kind of talent you awaken, my love for you shall not waver, my son. Northern muttered under his breath. As if you have a choice. Come again, boy? Nothing, old man. Just face forward and let's move on. I thought so too. Yeah, sure. They continued in silence through the dense forest. After a while, Shin grew suspicious. It had been a while since they had entered the forest, and yet, they had not encountered a single monster. In Ultrael's forests, monsters lurked in abundance. This could be blamed on rifts that were not challenged in time. This then led to a shattering, which caused monsters to pour out of the rift and attack humans. Some of the monsters had even blended with the natural environment of Ultrael after escaping slaughter. After 3,000 years, they were now available in different regions throughout the world. Although less dangerous than those in rifts, accurate preparation was important before anyone could dare to hunt them. In fact, a drifter never hunted alone. The ferocious beasts could easily overpower a lone fighter. Yet in 15 years of hunting, with extensive knowledge of his quarry, Shin had always emerged victorious. He was cautious and meticulous in his plans. He knew the folly of recklessness more than anyone. To face the forest's monsters unprepared pretty much meant certain death. Initially, Shin refused to bring Northern on hunts, but his wife Aisha convinced him otherwise. To Shin's surprise, Northern proved an asset. Intently observant, he was adept at strategizing based on the monster's weaknesses. Unlike other kids, he wasn't reckless and never wandered off while his father was busy hunting. Instead, he would pay rapt attention. He was also a tremendous help when it came to building a plan based on his knowledge of the monster that Shin wanted to hunt. So over the years, Shin usually forgot that Northern was just a kid. Well, on the outside at the very least. And most especially both of them had a very fantastic element guiding them. Luck. But now something was amiss. At the very least, they should have spotted aerial creatures too quick and clever to kill. Something's wrong, Shin muttered, surveying the eerily quiet forest. It's too quiet. It's like the life in this forest has been driven away. He mumbled to himself, his concern palpable. Northern watched his father intently, sensing his unease. Shin, is everything all right? He inquired cautiously. Shin felt like he was forgetting something important. His expression conflicted as he grappled with his thoughts. His eyes widened in realization. He spurred their steed into a frenzied gallop. I forgot. The full moon was 3 days ago. Confusion flooded Northern. What danger lurked in the wake of the full moon? Though they never hunted on those days, he never thought to ask why. What could terrify even the unflappable Shin? Of course, Northern knew better than to let his curiosity get the best of him. He was as focused on getting out of this place as his father was. The steed ran with a tremendous might and speed, but it felt like it wasn't enough. Shin pulled the reins harder, urging the mount to go faster and faster. But they had gotten to a point where speed could no longer save them from their impending doom. Before any of them could understand a thing, a massive body shoved itself into them from the side. Shin had belatedly perceived something, but there wasn't enough time to look, so he quickly wrapped himself around North and covered both of them with manifested soul essence, serving as a defense as their bodies were flung away with the steed. They both tumbled away, Shin striking his back against a tree while holding Northern in his arms. A web of cracks ran through the bark of the tree as he made contact with it. Had the beast used a little bit more force than it did, or had Shin not excellently absorbed a lot of shock from the attack with a defensive tactic, the tree would have probably shattered. Still, this much damage was a lot for the young man. He had perfectly protected his son, but at the cost of his own internal damage. He bent over and spewed blood. "Shin, are you okay? You're bleeding so much." Northern's voice rose with so much concern as his father let out the last of his red gore while holding his stomach, as his back throbbed. But the young man slowly looked up, his expression steeled and dangerously fierce.
"Hey, son."
Northern slowly turned his face to the direction in which his father's eyes were glued. His eyes widened and shook as he saw what had slammed himself into both of them. In fact, they were very lucky to be alive. No, it wasn't luck. The fact that they were alive really showed how strong Shin was. However, their luck had run out. Meeting a terror like this was the end of the road for both of them. The monster stared at them with palpable hatred, as if they had killed something of its own before. It glared at them viciously, its dirty, jagged, and boorish teeth gnashing with a bloodthirsty ferociousness. It was a cat-like creature with 6 legs and 2 pairs of tentacles, 2 meters long, sprouting from its shoulders, each ending in a pad with sharp thorny edges. The abhorrent creature was covered in a pelt of lustrous black fur, powerfully rolling over coiled muscles. 9 feet long, and guessing from the way it used its body against the steed, it must weigh over 600 kilograms. Northern could tell immediately because he was the one who took care of the steed and monitored its eating rate. He paid attention to such things as its weight and height changes. The beast wouldn't have been able to throw them all away with a body slam if it wasn't at least twice as heavy as the horse. He looked back at the crack in the tree. That was another proof. And in a few minutes of figuring out how strong the beast was, Northern could tell that it was a big deal. What the hell is a beast like this looking for around here? It belongs to the deeper part of the forest. Usually, these kinds don't come here. But on or after the full moon, higher rank monsters in the northern forest come out to hunt. Shin's breath was low. His eyes did not move away from the monster even as he addressed his son. Beads of sweat formed all over his face and his eyes narrowed, terrified of the might of the creature. "Listen to me, son. I will need you to run." Northern paled. "What the hell are you even talking about?" Shin smiled crookedly. "You have no say in this, little boy." The monstrous creature prowled, its lustrous black fur glinting in the muted forest light. Gnashing teeth and throaty snarls betrayed its bloodthirst as it sized up the 2 humans, hate-filled eyes tracking their every movement. Immediately he sighted an opening, as the beast moved to the other side, and Shin shouted, "Now, boy, go!" Northern hesitated, but his father roared, "Go!" The monster struck as Northern spun on his heels. But Shin spurred towards it, swinging his sword. It slammed its body against Shin, who grunted as he strained to brace himself, boots carving furrows in the dirt. Northern sprinted through the trees, heart hammering in his ears, his father's groan echoing behind him. Shin's muscles tensed as the creature powerfully pushed forward. Suddenly the beast retreated in a spring of motion. Shin, seeing the quick opening, swung his sword at the beast, but before he could complete the arch, the beast lunged at him with a bone-chilling roar, its heavy paw slashing with ragged claws. Shin, realizing he'd been ensnared, swiftly spun away, but the beast was too close for him to escape unscathed. Though he managed to avoid serious injury, thanks to his quick reflexes, a shallow gash marred his arm. As two tentacles darted forth like thrown darts, he ducked low, evading them before leaping back to gain distance. The beast relentlessly pressed forward, its appendages closing in around Shin. One tentacle aimed for his midsection while its mouth sought to crush his shoulder with razor-sharp teeth. Twisting desperately, Shin narrowly evaded the worst, but not without a bloody wound to his side. Without hesitation, the creature attacked again, its tentacles, fangs, and claws working in ruthless coordination. Despite the searing pain and blood loss, Shin relied on his experience to counter and evade, striking back whenever an opportunity arose. Each clash of steel against thorny edges echoed through the forest as Shin and the beast engaged in a deadly dance. Despite the creature's swift and powerful tentacles, Shin matched its speed with his long sword, each strike bringing him closer to victory. At first, Shin struggled to adapt to the beast's ferocity, but as the battle raged on, he grew more calculating, exploiting its patterns to his advantage. Sweat streamed down his face as he darted and parried, leaving shallow scars on the beast's black fur with each well-placed blow. As tension filled the air, Shin seized the moment of weakness, striking a vulnerable spot beneath the creature's forelegs. A guttural roar echoed through the clearing, signaling the beast's pain, and reaching Northern, who was currently running away with a pale face. He suddenly stopped in realization. What am I doing right now? He was running away, leaving Shin to deal with a very dangerous beast, when this could be his perfect chance to see his father's true skill. It was stupid and reckless, but Northern had been all along. However, taking this risk meant he would come to terms with the fact that he would die, and probably also believed that Shin wouldn't let that happen, as he also wouldn't let his father, even though adopted, die. His fists trembled as he clenched tightly. Then slowly he turned around. Well, here goes nothing. He launched into motion, running in the direction he should have been running away from. A dangerous spark appeared in his eyes as he moved his legs faster. Back in the fray, the forest seemed to hold its breath as Shin and the beast clashed with relentless ferocity. Each strike of their weapons reverberated through the air, cracking the ground beneath them as if nature itself trembled at their confrontation. Chapter 5: First Awakening. Back in the fray, the forest seemed to hold its breath as Shin and the beast clashed with relentless ferocity. Each strike of their weapons reverberated through the air, cracking the ground beneath them as if nature itself trembled at their confrontation. With lightning speed, the beast's tentacles shot forward like whips, lashing out with deadly precision. Shin's long sword met them with an equally swift movement, the clash of steel against thorny edges creating a symphony of battle amidst the silence of the forest. As they fought, the ground beneath them churned with their movements, creating a chaotic battlefield where every step was fraught with danger. Shin danced nimbly, his movements a blur of calculated strikes and evasions, while the beast pressed forward relentlessly, its eyes gleaming with primal fury. Despite the odds stacked against him, Shin refused to yield as he drew upon every ounce of strength and skill at his disposal to keep the beast at bay. With each exchange, he found new openings, exploiting them with surgical precision and chipping away at the creature's defenses. But the beast was not without its own tricks, its tentacles moving with an almost supernatural speed and agility. They lashed out unpredictably, forcing Shin to constantly adjust his tactics to avoid being ensnared or struck down. Steel rang against steel thorns as Shin's blade met the beast's sweeping tentacle in a sparked parry. He riposted swiftly, driving forward in a lunging attack, but his sword only found empty air as the creature bounced back with startling agility. They circled one another, two apex predators locked in a deadly match. Shin's eyes narrowed, reading the tautness of the beast's muscles and the twitching anticipation of its barbed appendages. At that moment, Northern arrived, seeing the effect of battle in just the short time he had not been around, made him appalled. This was definitely not a battle for him. An instant later it attacked, tentacles erupting toward him like striking snakes. Shin moved between them, each near miss drawing a line of fire across his skin. The razored tips made furrows into the trunk of the tree where he had been standing mere seconds ago. Shin went on the offensive, his blade seeking out the root of each lashing tentacle. But the monster seemed to have endless limbs to throw against the lone warrior's steel. For every gash Shin carved into its corded muscle, 3 more appendages emerged from the underbrush to drive him back. With a grunt of effort, he hacked through half the width of a tentacle even as another coiled around his leg. Thorns pierced his calf to his very bone as Shin was ripped off his feet, the tentacle slicing its way up from his thigh. Shin crashed into a tree, his back erupting in fresh agony against unforgiving bark. He saw stars, but through blinking tears made out the dark shape hurtling toward him for the kill. With no time for thought, Shin moved from his huddled state and then threw himself beneath the monster's strike. Shin stood tall, his sword held at the ready, his eyes bloodshot yet focused on his foe. The tattered remnants of the shirt Aisha had lovingly made him flapped in the wind, revealing the wounds underneath. Northern blinked back, surprised to see his normally joking father so grim and determined. Shin radiated tightly coiled danger like the monster facing him amidst the shattered trees. As the creature hunkered down, digging its claws into the earth, Shin exploded into motion. His blade whipped backward before he shot forward, shattering the ground where he stood. He appeared within the beast's guard, striking like a thunderclap. Caught off balance, the beast retreated frantically on 6 piston-like legs. But Shin pressed his advantage ruthlessly, another copy of himself bursting from the brush to hack at the creature's flank. It contorted wildly to evade the blows, its uncanny flexibility allowing it to duck impossibly low while its tentacles lashed out defensively even as it scrambled away. But a third Shin appeared, his sword carving deadly arcs through the air. For a few desperate seconds, the tentacles blurred as they countered the simultaneous strikes until an ungodly cacophony of steel on steel thorns drowned out all else. Northern's eyes widened with so much exhilaration as he saw several copies of his father battling the monster-like exarch of power themselves. He had never seen it until now, but he was sure this was Shin's talent, the ability to clone himself. Despite the trio of relentless attackers, the beast refused to fall, its uncanny speed and instincts allowing it to twist away from every killing thrust. Abruptly, the beast reared up with a spine-chilling bellow and launched itself skyward. Shin moved faster than Northern's eye could track, all 3 of him closing the distance as the creature landed lightly. Their swords sang, Shin's clones coordinating seamlessly to attack from all angles. Northern always felt there was more to this talent thing. Everyone treated it like there was, but ultimately no one was really comfortable talking about their talent. But this experience, what he was witnessing was the peak. The movements were sharp, shooting from one place to another, making cracks in trees. 3 of his fathers followed the beast with lightning speed, easily warding off its tentacles and thrusting vicious attacks. The beast was just too strong, it was persistent, it was smart, it was innovative, and most of all, no matter the attacks that scrapped its body, the abhorrent creature was never bothered. Instead, it responded with an even deadlier ferocity that would cause Shin to be on the tip of his feet even more than before. All of the 3 Shins were smooth, their movements unfailing in any way. His footwork was amazing, in the places that one lacked, another filled in. They were like the movement of the ocean waves on a dark night, calm and serene but deadly in force and strength. Yet the beast was fast. It either escaped by the skin of its teeth or one of the Shins escaped by a hair's breadth. Northern was filled with so much awe for the Shin's combat style. It was not the usual one that he had always seen. It had a flow shockingly calm and wavy, one Shin connected to another, in a mesmerizing yet bloody manner. If the beast was not as fast or as strong, it probably would have died a long time ago. A realization dawned on him. The amazement, the level of comprehension that filled his head with each of Shin's movements made his head fizzy. He couldn't say he particularly understood anything, but it was overwhelming. He felt like everything was connecting in his head. Then something happened. Northern's agonized cry cut through the din. Congratulations! The rift is breaking a space in your soul. Your soul will be taking a new form. A soul core is being created. A warm sensation entered his chest. He could feel something struggling to burst out of his entire being. But it was so hard. Because of this, a fiery pain shot through his bones. In just a second, Northern was filled with so much pain that he felt like he could die from it. A guttural cry escaped his mouth as he folded on the ground and tried to hold himself together. A dead silence filled the place immediately after the cry. All three Shins, their eyes froze in shock, monitoring the abhorrent creature as it also paused, a ferocious spark appearing in its eyes. With a rumbling growl, the beast gathered itself to spring towards the sound. But Shin was a heartbeat faster, fear and desperation fueling his movements. He became a whirling typhoon, his paired clones adding their strength to the assault. The very air screamed at their passage as Shin placed himself firmly between predator and prey. As the beast landed, Shin whizzed towards him with extraordinary speed. Pushing himself past what he was capable of was how he was able to meet the beast. He lashed out his blade in a macabre frenzy. The beast's tentacles lunged at him, and they both became locked in an even greater speed of assault before the other two Shins joined. Tentacles and blades clashed wildly, all precision and technique lost to raw fury on both sides. Blood was sprayed in great arcs with every blow. Process failed. Retrying process. Process failed. Retrying process. Process failed. Northern bit his tongue strongly, while he writhed from the pain of having his entire soul torn to shreds over and over again. His father fought desperately to protect him from the death gnash of the beast. For a moment he didn't know what to think about or what this feeling was. There was a monotonous voice in his head, repeating the same thing over and over again. Process failed. Retrying process. Process failed. Retrying process. Process failed. What was this voice? Tearing apart his soul and forcefully trying to form a soul core. System notice. Soul damage has been detected. Soul damages can be healed using Nexus Blessing. Suddenly a panel along with a cold feminine voice appeared. Somehow it soothed Northern's ear. He had never heard the voice before or wasn't even sure what he was seeing, but it offered him salvation. Yes. Yes. System notice. You have used ×1 Nexus Blessing. You have gained a 1% chance to resist soul attacks. Finally, the pain began to simmer down. Soul core creation failed. Talent unable to manifest. A frown creased Northern's face, but another voice, different from the sadistic one, rang in his ears again. System notice. Your soul cannot take a form. Searching for a unique system ability for your soul. Searching. Result found. Unique system ability has been found. Unique system ability Copycat has been gained. Awakening ability Copycat. Chapter 6. I can copy talents. Ultrael was a world that operated a little differently when it came to the laws that governed universes. It came to the notice of the gods that this particular world had spiraled out of control, and a seed of destruction had been planted, linking it with dimensions beyond their reach, with beings that could even rival their power. The universal gods then decided to cast the gateway aside, sending it to the lowest level of the reincarnation pathway. No soul should have been able to access it. Northern didn't know it yet, but the most dreadful thing that could have ever happened to him was being born in this world. However, the most amazing thing was also that he received something from that god before the old lady goddess interrupted. Talent awakening was the unique sequence of Ultrael. It wasn't like that in other worlds. Another thing that other worlds did not have was the voice of the world. Ever since the beginning, Ultrael had always had a voice, unlike other worlds. Most worlds believed it to be the first world. It was quite untouchable to them. It had been a beautiful place to live in until a seed of destruction was sown. This seed caused an anomaly in the space sequence of Ultrael, as other dimensions started leaking into it, pouring out monstrosities that even the gods feared. Every being unfortunate enough to find themselves in this world was always blessed with a talent at a certain age. There were early bloomers and also late bloomers. There were several categories of triggers for talent awakening. Sometimes it could be a trauma, other times a new death experience. Usually it was when one officially became 15. And in rare cases, it could happen as a result of a magnifying encounter with knowledge. But those were extremely rare cases. The beast soared through the air towards Northern, its wicked claws outstretched. Then, with a thunder-like sound, another Shin appeared overhead, his sword lancing out in a vicious thrust. Steel pierced the creature's hide and ripped free in a spray of violet blood. The beast staggered with a strangled roar, its foul blood forming a puddle on the ground. Shin arrived in front of it, flanked by his two clones. Their blades, glistening wetly in the dappled light, leveled unwaveringly at their wounded foe. The beast's baleful eyes were wide, its tentacles writhing more warily now. It was cornered, surrounded on three sides by Shin's unrelenting copies. Those glinting swords formed a razor-sharp perimeter, promising swift death should the creature try to force through. Still, cunningness glimmered in the beast's gaze as it watched Northern struggle to rise. The boy was vulnerable, oblivious to the danger around him as he sought to understand what was happening inside him. Shin tracked the monster's focus, his stance coiling even tighter. "You're done here," he stated, no trace of his usual humor in the deadly tone. The clones echoed his movements, weapons poised to mete out lethal punishment should the beast attempt to close in on Northern again. Their swords wove patterns in the air, an intricate, threatening language that allowed no doubt of Shin's words. The beast wavered, then gathered itself with rippling muscles. Shin's expression went flat, cold purpose emanating from those hardened features. "You are getting nowhere near my son." With an eerie synchrony, he and his duplicates exploded forward. Their blades carved ruthless lines, aiming to sever limbs and open arteries. The beast whipped its tentacles wildly, fending off strikes from all angles. The young boy was still vulnerable. He didn't even know what was going on. He was overwhelmed by his problems. The flood of pain had washed away, leaving him with the aftermath, sore muscles. He just wanted to stay in his current position and rest the day away. But it wasn't like he could. He had failed to manifest a talent. This was something he had looked forward to, and it wasn't going to work out. What would happen to his dream of becoming a drifter? His soul core wasn't forming, but there was something else awakening inside of him. "What is happening to me?" he wondered. After his father had mentioned him awakening a high-rank talent, he had honestly thought about it too and considered that it wouldn't be bad. But all that was happening now was an anomaly he didn't even know how to deal with. He couldn't form a soul core, and simply put, he was talentless. But there was something else inside of him, the awakening of an ability. What was he to make of this? Amidst all of his musings, Northern felt so much fury welling up inside him. Damn. He had to get up. Northern's head screamed at him. He was caught in a cruel contrast between what he should do and the horror that enslaved his mind at that moment. Seeing his father desperately battling to protect him, Northern felt something stir deep within. He could no longer remain a vulnerable child lying vulnerable as Shin shed blood in his defense. Placing his palms on the ground, he hauled himself upright with newfound determination. The beast seized an opening as one of Shin's clones slowed a fraction, crashing its thick tail into his chest and sending Shin flying backward as he spat out blood. Even as his other clone plunged his sword deep into its haunch, the creature's thick tentacles whipped out, catching and wriggling the other Shin around until it withered to dust. The remaining clone desperately tried to avoid the frenzied assault, but soon fell beneath ruthless claws, shredded to wisps. The original Shin struggled to rise, but the creature had already fixed its rapacious gaze upon Northern. Gathering itself, muscles bunching, it sailed through the air toward its new prey. Time seemed to slow, the beast descending as Shin poured his fading strength into a last-ditch sprint. But deep down, he knew that it wasn't enough. Then an idea popped into his mind. Shin clenched the blade tightly and shouted, "Northern!" The steel flashed as Shin hurled his sword with the last of his might. Somehow Northern's hands closed around the hurtling hilt. He braced himself as the creature fell upon him, and buried the sword deep into the soft muscle. The force of the impact drove the blade through, completely impaling it as it landed awkwardly. Blood sprayed the ground as Northern retreated warily. Shin placed himself once more between his son and the creature, though it finally seemed at death's door. Yet, it continued to cling to life, eyes burning with feral defiance. The standoff stretched taut, seconds crawling by, until finally, slowly, the light in its gaze dimmed. With a shudder, the beast toppled sideways, and the battle was won. Shin stood numb, stunned before crashing relief swept in. They had survived. This was nothing short of a miracle. He turned with a joyful expression, only to see Northern frozen. An unbelievable grin formed on his son's face as he scanned the amount of things that popped up before his eyes. System notice. You have slain a calamity beast. Black Rogue. Your soul has absorbed the talent of the beast. You have gained +6 talent fragments. Due to awakening, all Nexus blessings will be converted to talent fragment. Converting. You have gained +944 talent fragments. Talent fragments. 950/1000. Talent fragments can be used to copy talent. Do you want to copy talent? Advanced cloning? A-class? Northern didn't even know if that was a question. Copy talents? His head went blank for a second. He didn't know what was going on, but he was just going to do it anyway. Besides, he was experiencing an even more overwhelming feeling. With his own 2 hands, he had killed a monster. Of course, his father did most of the work, but the system counted it as his kill and said something about his soul absorbing the talent of the beast. What exactly was that? I didn't think that beasts could have talents too. Basically, in Ultrael, everything that had a soul core, and everything that had a soul core had a talent. But the composition of human and monster talents were vastly different and the opposite of each other. It should be impossible for talent to be absorbed from a monster. Only their soul essence could be absorbed, and that was strictly only possible in a rift. Killing monsters outside a rift was just like killing an animal. They were beings that had left the structure of their world and become a part of Ultrael. Of course, their soul cores could be harvested and manually absorbed using different cultivation methods. However, the system could not be wrong. It said his soul had absorbed the beast's talent. This gave way to another explanation. The talents could have been broken down into talent fragments, which could then be used to copy actual talents, just like he was about to do right now. Northern had completely forgotten the bitter feeling in his mouth after he discovered a few seconds ago that he was talentless. He tried to think about what could have brought this change. That handsome man after my death probably had something to do with it. Could he be the one that was referred to as Nexus? Northern didn't feel too good thinking that he might be playing into someone else's plan, but he would tackle these things one at a time. First, he had to do this. Yes. He passed a mental command, accepting the option of copying the talent. System notice. You have used 300 talent fragments. Northern's mouth fell. So expensive? He had already been making plans for all his talent fragments. First, he had to go and copy his mother's healing magic, and then he wanted to strategically copy other talents that would give him enough strength to fight another beast. If killing them was the only way to get talent fragments, he figured he'd be doing that a lot to become the world's strongest. System notice. Do you have copied talent? Advanced cloning, A-class. Northern saw the panel and a wide grin parted his lips. Northern, are you okay? His father's breathing was rugged and the poor man looked a mess. He was sweating, with blood on his lower lip and jaw. His shirt was torn savagely, with crude claw marks plastered to his skin, dripping crimson. Just when Shin asked Northern, he saw something that made his entire pain disappear for a second, his eyes widening in shock. Northern. His voice shook. He wasn't sure what exactly to say. Northern smiled as he turned to himself. This was not a mirror image, it was a physical him that he could see and touch. Snow-white hair, blue eyes, pale and smooth skin, flawless in appearance. He looked like he had been supernaturally molded with the celestial sea, as something about his eyes reflected the endless serenity of the sea, and at the same time a strange and unreadable spark. Northern looked proudly at his clone. This was the first talent he had copied, and he already had so much planned for it. Oh, bless Eldek! Northern! You! Shin was appalled. So many thoughts ran through his head, but confusion shone on his face. You awakened! You awakened! My boy North has... She coughed out more blood. Northern ran towards him, his clone turning to dust. Father, you should rest and I'll tend to your wounds. Shin looked at his son as the young boy lowered him to the ground. Look at you acting all mature. Do you even know what herbs to pick? Carum opulifolius, which has a light orange shape. I can find them beside waters. Cyananthus, the blood leaf plant to stop your bleeding. While I crush some Carum opulifolius, and if I can find some lemon tooth, they will both be good as first aid. But since lemon tooth is a very rare plant, Carum opulifolius is enough. A smug expression showed on his face as he said this. Why am I even asking? You remember it all anyways. Shin murmured inaudibly. He looked at Northern and smiled. You awakened your talent. I'm so glad, North. Now all that's left is the call. His face went dim. Northern shook his head indifferently. Don't get your hopes up. The man scoffed and looked at the dead monster. Don't forget to remove all its cores. I'm guessing 3. Northern looked at the beast, aloof for a second or two. A 3-core beast? Monsters both inside and outside the rifts had more than just 1 soul cores and were ranked according to the number of soul cores they had. Fiend, Savage, Beast, Hellion, Maelstrom, Destroyer, Behemoth, Belial, Leviathan, Titan, Infernal. Of course, soul cores were not the only determinant of a monster's might. There was also their classification based on their danger level. Hazard, disaster, calamity, catastrophe, devil, abysmal, apex. Hazard represented a relatively minor monster that posed a limited danger, while disaster was a more dangerous monster but still natural to the habitat. Calamity was a monster that brought grave misfortune, often terrorizing entire villages. Catastrophe and devil suggest unimaginably chaotic monsters capable of massive destruction. Abysmal indicated a creature so horrifically evil its mere presence induced despair. And apex signified the ultimate monster, the peak predator against which no other could stand. These danger levels were flexible and not stereotypic. It was not impossible for a fiend to become an apex-level monster. This was what made these creatures really unpredictable. Northern and his father had fought and killed a calamity beast. This level of monster was enough to reign Canaan villages. Hundreds of soldiers would die trying to subdue the monster, and they had just survived an encounter against something like that. Wow! He whispered inaudibly and turned away. He looked at his resting father again before heading towards the direction of the herbs. They had really survived an impossible monstrosity. This was the beginning of Northern's life. He was super excited as something had awakened inside of him. He didn't know what it was, but there was so much spark. Chapter 7. Welcome home. After a few minutes, Northern came back with the herbs. He mixed the leaves together and crushed them with pebbles. Then he applied it on the surface of his father's wounds. The leaves were sinking into the wounds, causing Shin to grit his teeth at the stinging pain as his body easily absorbed the leaves. After that, Northern took the skinning knives and began tearing apart the monster's stomach. It was harder than usual and blood occasionally splashed on his face. But he persevered, and as his father said, it had 3 cores. It really was a calamity beast. Once again, Northern was at a loss for words. He considered calling it a miracle, but he preferred the word luck. However, that luck was brought by his father's experience, effort, and trust in him. If Shin had not decided at the last minute to throw his sword at him, then Northern was sure he'd be dead right now. The cores were whitish and full of soul energy. Shin grinned as he saw Northern retrieve them. "These are money, son. Money." Despite his wounded state, Shin's eyes gleamed eagerly, but the light faded as a thought struck him. Then, he looked at Northern questioningly. "Since you have awakened your talent, you should be able to absorb the cores. Do you want to do that instead? It will give you a great boost. I'm assuming you have a similar talent to mine. It won't be easy nurturing it, but everything is still left to the second awakening." Shin explained. Northern looked at the cores with a thoughtful expression. He didn't know a lot about himself yet or the strange powers he had received. Would he even be able to absorb the energies in the cores if he tried? Also, would there be a second awakening for him? Northern felt like he knew the answer to that question. He closed his eyes and smiled innocently. "How about we just get home first?" "Ah, yes, right. Your mother would be so worried about us." Northern helped his father up and placed his arm around his neck. He wasn't of a comfortable height to support Shin, but he wasn't that short either. Slowly both of them made their way home. Aisha waited anxiously. It was late into the night, and her husband and son still hadn't returned from their hunt. The other villagers tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, you know your husband. That man was a renowned drifter. He'll be fine. Shin's the strongest in the village. No need to fret." But she couldn't shake her unease. As the night dragged on, her patience wore thin. Finally, she heard footsteps. She raised her hand, conjuring a ball of fire. With 2 fingers, she controlled the flickering flame, squinting to see who approached. When she made out their familiar faces, she opened her palm, the fire softening from a weapon into a gentle light. "Shin? Northy," she called out. The flames brightened, revealing Shin's numerous injuries. Terror seized her and she rushed to them. "My dear, I would never." He froze mid-sentence as Aisha strode past him and hugged Northern tightly. He huffed dramatically. "I'm the wounded one, yet you go to him. I'm perfectly fine. Can't you see?" Ignoring her husband's theatrics, Aisha inspected Northern, relief flooding her. Then she turned to Shin sternly. "What happened?" Shin sighed. "I forgot. The full moon. A calamity beast attacked us." Aisha paled, eyes wide. "A calamity beast? Shin, you could have died." Shin gave a bitter smile. "It's not like I didn't know. My survival was due to luck and your son." He looked at Northern as she said this, his wife also turning to do the same. Northern frowned a little bit and shook his head to deny it, knowing very well what his father would say. "Yes, he killed the beast." "No, I did not awaken." Both their words came out simultaneously, causing a grave silence to follow. Shin and Northern stared at each other cluelessly. Aisha looked at both of them and then belatedly processed what she heard. She turned to her son. "Wait, did you just say you awakened? What part of did she not understand?" Northern cringed internally. How could he explain that he hadn't awakened at all? As his parents beamed with pride, he felt a twinge of guilt. He beheld their happy faces as they heard that he had awakened, and it became even harder to correct them. Aisha caressed his cheek, then grabbed Shin's ear. "Now let's go get you treated." "Aisha." Shin yelped as they headed inside. After all that had happened, Northern lay on his bed, staring at his dull ceiling. It all felt surreal, as if he hadn't just narrowly escaped death, as if he hadn't just copied his father's talent. Maybe it was all a hallucination. But it wasn't. He sat up abruptly, confusion etched on his face, as he remained silent for a few moments. Hey! He wasn't sure how to address this phenomenon, this thing that had granted him a powerful ability. I know you can hear me. I need an explanation. Tell me what's going on, Northern demanded. But minutes passed and still he received no response. It was frustrating. Why wouldn't it talk? How could he make it communicate? Then it dawned on him, what if he gave it a command? Copy talent. System notice. Invalid command. Whoa! Northern almost jumped back in surprise. He didn't actually think the trick would work. But now that it had, his hopes spiraled. Show me my talent. System notice. Access granted. Would you like to see your entire profile or just the talent section? Northern felt very accomplished as he saw the system progress in its communication skills. Yes. Show me my entire profile. System notice. Profile. Name Northern Lugard. Soul rank. Walker. Talent fragments. 650/1000. Copied talents. 1/1. Seeing the black panel bring out these runes, a lot of thoughts ran through Northern's head. When the first awakening commenced, every potential drifter was called a walker. It was also the first rank of their souls. In this state, the soul could not resist the call of the rift. All constantly beckoned on the soul of the newly awakened to enter the rift. After entering for the first time and coming out alive, their soul would gain a new rank, drifter, and they become fully awakened. Although they now had a fully formed core and in rare cases a dimensional name, they still couldn't resist the call at this stage. The next rank after becoming a drifter was a nomad. At this point, the call would become bearable and could be ignored without worrying about subconsciously walking into a rift. But for Ul's call to completely disappear, they needed to become vagrant. At this rank, they become masters of their own souls and were popularly referred to as such. Right now, Northern was the lowest and was prone to subconsciously walking. But he wondered if that was even going to be possible. As far as things went, Ul did not awaken any talent in him or form a soul core, which sort of meant there was no first awakening, or better still, it had been a failure. He looked at the runes that displayed his talent fragment. His face contorted with confusion. He had understood the part where he could absorb the talents of monsters he slayed and convert them to talent fragments which were used to copy the talent of other drifters. However, what about their soul energy? Usually, drifters gain soul energy from killing monsters. That was how their soul core grew and enlarged. But he did not have a soul core and couldn't gain soul energy. Did that mean he was stuck as a walker for the rest of his life? At this point, Northern felt like he was beginning to overthink it. I should rest, he thought to himself, but it was rather hard when he was faced with a strange thing that could change his life forever. Northern felt exhilarated at the thought of it. There was just one thing he felt he needed to do before going to sleep. Northern focused his command on the talent section. Immediately, another holographic panel appeared beside the main one. Copied talents. 1/1. Talent. Advanced cloning. Class. Talent true. Name. Many of 1. Description. I am 1, I am 2, I can be 3, 4 or 5. My personas are limitless and only limited to my imagination. In my hands all objects are more than 1. Talent ability. Self-clone. Attribute. Your soul rank is too low to access this information. Talent progression. 0 to 600. System notice. Talent fragments can be used to grow and evolve copied talents. Northern's mouth fell. It turned out he didn't just copy the talent's ability but also the true essence of the talent within a person's soul core, down to their dimensional name and attribute. His shoulder shook with excitement as his mouth curled into a delighted grin. This is good. This is so good. Chapter 8. Breakfast to boot. Breakfast to boot. The following morning, Northern awoke with a slight headache. However, the tantalizing aroma of his mother's freshly baked bread immediately lifted his spirits. That bread was his weakness. No matter how much he consumed, he always craved more. He spent a few moments pondering the previous night's events. The feeling was similar to when he purchased a brand new car back on Earth, but even better. He strode into the main parlor, where his mother was setting the table. Observing his hurried approach, she shook her head. "No, not yet. You need to bathe first. Today is special, remember? Shin informed me about it last night." "Oh, damn that blabbermouth." They shared the same quarters, so of course Shin would divulge everything. Now, his chance of clearing this misunderstanding had vanished. With slumped shoulders, he trudged back to his room as his father emerged from his own, yawning. Aisha embraced him, exchanging a kiss before he settled at the table. "What about your injuries? Are you sure you're up for today? Or should I go in your place?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "No worries, I'm perfectly fine. Your healing was superb," Shin replied with a grin, leaning in to whisper to her. "Plus, you're in no condition to handle the stress." Aisha's expression became exasperated, but she hushed him quickly, wary of Northern overhearing. "Don't say that here. We don't want Northern growing suspicious." Shin shrugged, murmuring, I know, I just worry he might feel hurt if he finds out later, especially since it's the news about a younger sibling." Aisha's demeanor shifted, becoming crestfallen as she considered her husband's words. However, her ears perked up at the sound of Northern finishing his bath. "Don't fret. I'll tell him after the test. It is you I'm concerned about. What if you encounter one of them?" Shin was impatiently eyeing the hot bread, but he quickly shifted his gaze to Aisha. "Who? Them?" Shin asked, his attention divided between his wife and the tempting bread. Aisha shot him a stern look, wordlessly reprimanding him. Shin sighed and settled back into his chair. "I'll do my best to behave and refrain from severing anyone's limbs," he quipped, earning a scolding glance from Aisha. "Just remember, you have a son whose future is at stake. Whatever happens in the city mustn't jeopardize his prospects," she admonished. "Yes, mother," Shin replied with a smirk. Aisha's expression turned serious. "I'm not joking," she warned. "Precisely, mother," Shin retorted playfully. Before Aisha could react, Northern emerged from his room, prompting the couple to quickly compose themselves. Both observed their son carefully as he took his place at the table, the unusual silence hanging awkwardly in the air. Normally, Northern would regale them with tales of his exploits, but today he ate his bread quietly, lost in thought. Shin, unable to resist the freshly baked bread any longer, tore off a slice and began chewing, speaking through a mouthful of food. "So, what's been going on with the kids?" he asked, his words muffled. "Dad, don't talk while you're chewing. What do you want to say that can't wait?" Shin and Aisha exchanged a glance as if silently passing the baton to the other. "We were just wondering if you've been doing okay lately. Most of your friends have gone off to the academy. You must be excited to join them," Aisha offered. Northern chewed thoughtfully, considering her words. Northern was silent as his mother's words came when he was eating, so he finished chewing before responding. But he pondered on her words as he chewed. "Do I really look forward to meeting them at all?" Northern didn't want to sound cynical, but he had learned the hard way about the treachery of people. His experiences on Earth had shown him the worst side of humanity, from betrayal by friends to the ultimate betrayal by his girlfriend, her father, and his supposed best friend. He couldn't trust people easily anymore. Making superficial friendships was not a priority. He understood the importance of networking and alliances, but he was wary of forming close bonds. His past experiences had taught him to be cautious. He finished chewing and swallowed, then addressed his mother. "I can't say I'm excited to see them, but I've always wanted to attend the academy since I was a child." "Boy, you talk as if you're no longer a kid. You're 14. Shin interjected. Northern shot him a glare, silencing him, and then he continued with his food. There was a vast contrast between drifters and those without talent, the unawakens. Due to the prowess, comfort, and security that drifters provided, they were cherished, loved, and granted outstanding privileges. One could find a drifter serving as a special night force for a kingdom. Although an unawakened could enlist and train to become one, they could never match a drifter's power. There was a very noticeable difference. But fortunately, the unawakens rarely wished to become drifters. Except for children, of course, who did not comprehend the dangers and perils that awaited them even at the start of their journey. They didn't know about the rifts. They didn't know the level of danger they posed and how many drifters perished daily. But the adults knew, which was why they were content with their day-to-day lives. Or, at the very least, they awakened talents that were utterly useless in combat but contributed massively to civilization. When destruction rained down and chaos spread like wildfire, in those days the number of drifters that died in every rift was alarming. Even though humans had awakened, they were lost on how to use their powers. Then suddenly, a man and his friends arose from the rubble. Challenging rifts and growing stronger, the three of them were praised as heroes of the Central Plains. It was said there was no rift that they entered that they did not emerge from. But time wasn't easy on them. The man and his friends decided to build an academy to train awakens, arm them with the knowledge of rifts, teach them about how talents worked, broaden their knowledge by teaching them battle styles, and expand their knowledge about magic. In that way, the ratio of awakens that perished would reduce, and their legacies would live on forever. A mighty academy with colossal, impenetrable walls was built on an island that belonged to the Central Plain continent. Different races from all over the world came to this place to become awakened, to increase their survival rate, become legends, and so on. The reasons were diverse and personal in even unthinkable ways. But the academy was a pinnacle not just of the Central Plain but the entire world. They had a place for everyone. All one needed was a talent, which made Northern very apprehensive. He had a talent, right? But he was very sure he would fail the talent test. After learning of the academy, he had yearned to be there so badly. Unlike these countryside bumpkins who merely thought attending the academy would bring fame and automatically make them established awakens. He wanted to know more about the world, about the rifts, about talents, and about himself. The origin of his birth. He could never forget what he saw that night, and even though he didn't care too much, there was no harm in finding his true mother, right? He needed to get away from this little village that stood on the border of a small kingdom if he wanted to do that. So he needed to attend the academy, which was why he decided to remain silent about not having a talent. It wasn't even a sound plan in his head. Yet, he wasn't sure telling his parents would be the best course of action. So, North, we were thinking about going for the talent test today. We could determine your rank and... Okay. Northern's answer was so quick it made Shin freeze with surprise. Okay? That was fast. He hadn't expected his son to agree to the request so readily. He stared at Northern tentatively and leaned forward, smacking his hand on the table. Why? Because I want to take the test and know my rank? Northern responded with a slight frown. Yes, but why? Just yesterday you weren't at all elated even when you awakened your talent. I even thought you were disappointed because you awakened a lame talent like my own. But all of a sudden you are giddy about going for the test. What am I missing? Northern chuckled. Dad, your talent is an A-class talent. Why wouldn't I feel at? Northern closed his mouth after realizing what he had just spewed. Of course I'm happy. It is not a regular cloning talent. It's basically a body double ability. Luckily his father was not too smart, so he didn't notice. Shin had never mentioned the grade of his talent, nor had Aisha. Both of them didn't even talk about talents. Northern had always wondered why but never asked the question. However, he knew this couple had a story and were hiding something, but settled for playing dumb. So, when do you want to go to the... Today? Shin was shocked once again. He looked at Northern suspiciously. Northern, is something wrong? Northern ate the last of his bread and responded. What could be wrong? I would love to enter Milgard Academy and become a great drifter. Is that out of place? Shin and Aisha stared in silence. What? Other kids my age dream of stuff like this too, you know? Donrak and his peers have left. I have no one to talk to around here except infants and steeds. Both of them were still looking at each other in total silence and shock. Then Shin spoke. But son, you've not exactly been like other kids. This is the first time I've seen you express any passion whatsoever for going to the academy. In fact, I didn't even think you were interested at all. Yes, Northy, we both thought you were not interested since you never mentioned it. Northern couldn't blame them. The only reason he never thought too deeply about it was because he was aware of their financial situation. He had seen how parents worked their asses off just to send their kids to the academy. While it was possible to enter that place on scholarship, it was near impossible for countryside bumpkins like them without extraordinary talents. Except for one. But Northern hated him, so let's not go there. But things were different now that he had discovered that he could copy talents. If he wanted to grow strong, he needed to copy lots of talent and kill lots of beasts. And the only place to freely do something like that was Milgard Academy. So he was either going to be selfish and be sure to reward them handsomely, or he was going to try to get in on scholarship. And since the evaluation test might fail, he was currently thinking of other ways to make that happen. He stood up, clearing the plates. I'll do the dishes, and when I'm done, can we go to the city? Shin looked at Aisha, who nodded at him. He closed his eyes and sighed. Fine. There's no problem. We'll go when you are done doing the dishes. Both of them watched their son in silence as he took the plates to the kitchen. Chapter 9, Shadows of the Past. Shadows of the Past. A large chariot, built with exquisite brown wood, and designed with a golden serpent, or more like a WRM, that was intricately carved along the lower end of the chariot. Its windows were rectangular and the glass was dark. The chariot was being pulled by two powerful steeds. They were black, their mane braided and flowing downwards. They had dark eyes that hinted at a savage fury. Despite being used as mounts, they were menacing and unapproachable. The carriage stopped in front of a stone building. It appeared like it belonged to the regular fantasy world, but there was something more. It wasn't just this building, it was the same with every other one around the city. Each building had its own beauty and the way they came out to be genuine. The city itself was built in the shadow of the western part of the forest north was sound in and named after. Its charm was matched by a backdrop of rich, luscious fields that had come to contribute to the agriculture in the city. The skyline was packed with elegant yet antique buildings that reached desperately for the sky, built with colored stones and granites, but skillfully carved out to resemble a futuristic skyscraper. Each building had its own uniqueness, obviously built with concrete but somehow managing to look magnifying. The desperate attempts of each building, however, gave them their appeal and made the entire city a lovely visage to behold. Flowers were aligned beside the road. The ground was tiled and the street was slightly crowded. People wearing casual outfits, something that seemed mixed between a civilized, modern, and medieval era. Most of them went about their business, but some stared at the carriage for some reason. Perhaps because of the beast, or the emblem that was engraved on both sides right at the edge of the serpent. A middle-aged man with lustrous black hair, sitting in front of the chariot and controlling the steeds, stepped down as they arrived. His two swords hanging on one side of his waist, hitting each other. He bowed and gently opened the door of the chariot in front of the tallest building in the city. This particular one even had a watchtower atop it, and was so large that it occupied the center of the city. Every other building was erected around it and many were scattered behind, leading back to the base of the forest. A boy with alabaster hair and deep gray eyes stepped out of the chariot. Contrary to what anyone would have expected, he was short and his facial features were cute to boot. Regardless, the middle-aged man composed himself with respect. The young boy was donned in a white cloak that had the same emblem as the chariot. A circle with the head of a griffin engraved inside it, but its beak slightly made to protrude out of it. Then small carvings of wings were on the sides of the circle. It was an emblem everyone knew and respected. Milgard Academy. What was a child from Milgard Academy doing in a remote city like this one? Would Milgard even send a chariot and an escort with a mere student? Isn't that a protector? Look at his uniform. People wondered aloud as they passed the chariot, but the young boy didn't seem to mind. The man behind him, on the other hand, worriedly looked around. With his voice coming out roughly, the boy spoke childishly. Let's go in. He marched in without any care in the world. The building's interior was just as amazing as the exterior. There were plush sofas placed around and black glass tables in the middle. Some people were silently sitting, enjoying a meal. Some were drinking while others were chit-chatting. At first, nobody paid attention to the young boy, but immediately after the middle-aged man entered, people started looking. They said the same words as the people outside after recognizing the man's black Victorian-era uniform. It was because of how incredibly strong people with that uniform were. They were a force to be reckoned with, as they not only protected the walls of the academy but also the borders of the Central Plain, killing any beast that dared to cross over from the Dark Continent. They were well respected and valued. For a person of such caliber to be escorting a child, people figured the child must be very important. The young boy leaned back and whispered to the man, "See, I told you, you should have changed your clothes." The man responded with a helpless sigh but still stood rigid with composure. He scanned the area while the young boy headed to the counter. The attendant was a lean man who looked like he was in his early 20s. He was dozing and hadn't even noticed that few people had arrived. Not until the boy stood on his toes and knocked on the counter. He jerked up and quickly put himself together. "Welcome, sir." His eyes first went to the man, then looked down to the boy who was not even as tall as the counter. "And sir." His voice sounded unsure. But the young boy didn't seem to care at all. "Where is Gilbert? Is he around?" The bartender looked at the boy with a confused look on his face, before correcting. "Oh, you mean Sir Gilbert? Yeah, I know what I said. Go tell him Ruffsburg is here. I don't like to wait, by the way." The bartender still looked confused. He looked at the young boy and looked at the man, not sure how exactly to put the message. Just then, the door opened and two people strode in. One was a dark-haired man with a scar crossing over his nose, and the other was a beautiful boy with snow-white hair and blue eyes. He quickly stopped to attend to them. "How can I help you?" The man spoke as they reached the counter. "I have brought my son to take the evaluation test." Both the young boy and the protector turned their heads slightly when they heard what the man said, but tried not to make it obvious. "Another aspirant for the school, huh?" The young boy mused in his head while the bartender responded to the new entrance with elation. "Oh my goodness! Wait a minute. I'll go fetch the headmaster for you." He quickly ran through the door behind the counter and disappeared. A different energy compared to when the young boy had asked him. But it was understandable. It was a joyous occasion when people came to test whether they had talents and what the details of their talents were. However, that joy could quickly become depression when people learned how useless their talent was. Still, it always began with joy. Silence ensued between the unacquainted party as they both waited for the bartender to come back. After about 4 minutes, the protector turned his head and frowned slightly. He hesitated before opening his mouth. "Shin." The scarred man and his white-haired son both turned their heads. Immediately, a hint of recognition appeared on Shin's face, followed by a frustrated look. "Of all the people I could have run into today, why did it have to be this one?" Shin became chagrined. It could be vividly seen on his face that he didn't like this person, or perhaps the encounter itself. "I wonder who he is?" Maybe this was a link to one of the secrets his parents were hiding. Northern wondered, observing the rigid man. He was fierce in appearance. The air that surrounded him was also heavy. Northern had never seen him fight and didn't know anything about protectors, but merely looking at the man, he could tell that he was going to be dangerously strong. He had the presence of a mighty warrior, even far greater than his father's. Northern observed in silence while his father turned to the man and tilted his head. "Sorry, do I know you?" Shin tried to feign ignorance but was very bad at it. Even his son was disappointed at such a lame attempt. He had given himself away the moment that he became shocked at the mention of his name. It was written on his face that he recognized this man. Why be dumb and deny it? Northern shook his head tiredly but minded his business. He didn't even look or try to hear their conversation. The man's voice was gentle and forbearing, coming out with a soothing calmness. "Don't be like that, Shin. I know it was a rough ride, but you were a part of us too." Shin sighed and turned away from him, looking at the door. Will this guy just come out already? He thought to himself, ignoring the rigid man. Eventually, the kid next to the rigid man asked after seeing how he was being ignored. Someone you know? The protector leaned towards his ear and whispered inaudibly. In the next second, the boy's eyes widened. Ora, it's you, the crazy scion of the Kageyama clan. Shin slightly turned his head and fixed the boy with an arctic stare, his eyes glinting like shards of frost ready to pierce the soul. Immediately, the boy showed some reluctance, but the protector's countenance changed. He held his sword, brows furrowed. You will show respect to the master. Shin's icy stare shattered the moment he heard the word. There was only one person in this world that a protector with the caliber of this man would call master. His eyes widened as the realization dawned on him. Simultaneously, a big man with a full beard and roughened hair came out of the door behind the counter with the bartender. Well. He paused the moment he sighted the boy in a cloak and the protector behind him. He paled, all color draining from his face. Then his eyes narrowed a second later. He easily grabbed the bartender by his shirt, lifting him as he asked with a serious tone. Why didn't you tell me there was another visitor? I'm sorry. I thought the evaluation test was more important. The bartender pleaded, struggling effortlessly in the powerful grip of the bestial man. He was large and wide in all areas with a rippled muscle frame. But his face was slightly wrinkled, and he wore rectangular glasses. He dropped the bartender as people were already glancing in their direction, and the least he wanted was to gather attention. He lowered his head and spoke respectfully. Welcome, but I have told you several times to at least use the body of an adult when coming here. What do you mean? I love this body. Do you know how much it took me to create it? Besides, it's amazing how you always manage to recognize me regardless of the body I come in. Adjusting his glasses, the headmaster sighed helplessly and looked at the protector. Welcome, Danzo. It must have been a lot coming with this old fart. Danzo smiled politely and bowed his head, not saying anything. Then the man looked at the two other people by their side. You lot must be the ones that came for the evaluation test. I'll assign an instructor to you. He turned to the bartender. Fetch that drunkard for me. Yes, sir. The bartender hastened through the back door and disappeared once again. Well then, shall we go upstairs? Somewhere private. I presume you didn't just come here to show me your new body. The boy broke into a crooked grin, picked his nose, then blew it off. While you are with the master, is it okay if I see someone? Gilbert seemed shocked for a while. Danzo was the kind of person who wouldn't step away from the person in question even when he was begged to. However, he wanted to see someone. Gilbert smiled and commented, that someone must be important. Don't worry, it's not like anything can harm him anyway. The young boy looked at Shin, then Danzo, his brows furrowed slightly, but it eased up less than a second later and he left without any concern. Danzo watched the two of them use the stairs that curled around the pillar that stood next to the counter. After they had gone, he turned to the scarred man beside him and said nicely, Shin, please let me talk to you. Shin gritted his teeth. This is what I hate about him. He is the worst incarnation of wickedness, yet he sounds so nice. It's so inconvenient, very inconvenient. Northern raised a brow and looked at his father, who was still deliberating. Dad, I think you should go with him. I'll be fine on my own. He wasn't saying it because he thought Shin was worried about him. This was him telling his father to go. And Shin quite understood the message already. Having lost before he even started fighting, he exhaled. All right then. See you in a minute. He turned to the protector, who was admiring the kindness of the boy. Danzo turned to him and nodded. Follow me, he uttered and moved forward with grace. Shin, for a minute, felt like he was back to being a protector and receiving orders from Danzo again. The tone in which he spoke was very annoying, but he followed in silence until they were outside. Shin folded his hands. So, what is it? Danzo smiled as he looked back at the door. Is that you and Aisha's son? Shin didn't look surprised when he mentioned his wife's name. He had been with Aisha since he had been a protector. Everyone sort of knew about her. Even his family. He responded unceremoniously. Yes. Shin, I know it's been a few years and it's hard to forget what happened, but we need men like you back at the border. The old days, how the 5 squads would plunge into the wilderness to battle beasts. Don't you miss that? Shin frowned darkly. Excuse me, Danzo. As much as I'm trying not to be disrespectful to you, don't test me. You missed it? My entire squad was killed because of a political game that you decided to turn a blind eye to, and you want me to come back. Things are being put in place. It's getting better. Grandmaster Ruffsberg is dealing with it. Like that would bring back my dead squad. Shin stopped and lowered his eyes for some seconds before saying with a softer tone, It means nothing, Sir Danzo. Respectfully, I decline your offer. I have a family to cater for. It's dangerous at the border. Danzo looked inside. Northern was already talking to some red-haired lady with a bottle of booze under her armpit. He turned back to Shin with a solemn expression. He will most likely be coming to the academy soon, won't he? Shin scowled at him. What are you trying to do? I'm not trying to do anything, Shin. You know how it is. Being a protector gives your family an edge over everything. See, what matters is that we miss you at the front and we would like to have the body double. Shin back. Your skills and your abilities are not for this place. They are for the war front. That is where you were forged. After giving the speech with his hands landing on Shin's shoulder in the process, Shin looked at him with irritation, removing Danzo's hand away like it was dog poop. Danzo allowed a ghostly smile before adding, Think about my offer. I hope I see you around. He tapped Shin's shoulder again and walked inside. Shin stayed outside longer, sneering at his tall frame from behind, then went inside as Danzo climbed the stairs. Hey, where's my son? The bartender paused in cleaning the wine glass in his hands. Oh, he is with Instructor Annette. She'll be conducting his evaluation test. You can wait around for him while you order a bottle or 2 of alcohol. Shin looked at the young bartender with a fake smile and walked away, later settling down on a white sofa not too far from the counter. What? Would a bottle hurt that much? The bartender mumbled to himself. Northern stood opposite the red-haired lady with an eye patch, ready to go through with the first test. The physical test. Chapter 10. Evaluation Test, Part 1. As Shin and the stoic protector strode out, Northern's gaze drifted to the door the bartender had used earlier. Furtively glancing left and right, he slipped his clone through the door, leaving his original self waiting patiently at the counter. His eyes wandered as he hovered in the entryway, drawn to the stairs where the young boy and Citadel's headmaster had ascended minutes prior. He briefly pondered the kid's identity before dismissing such idle curiosities. It was better to focus on the matter at hand. I hope Shin hasn't started any trouble. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than the door banged open, nearly startling Northern back a step. A fiery woman barged in, her vivid vermilion tresses whipping about as if stirred by inner flames. Thick, unruly strands spiked and twisted around themselves in a chaotic cascade atop the furry mantle draped over her powerful shoulders. One calloused hand gripped the neck of an already half-drained bottle while the other hung slack at her side. Her face was mostly obscured by her hair, save for one smoldering eye that was glaring with unsettling intensity. She cut an unmistakable figure. A hardened drifter clad in dirt-caked rags and piecemeal leather armor molded to a body sculpted by a lifetime of savage conflict. Loss and unimaginable hardship haunted the harsh lines etched into her face. This was someone long accustomed to surviving through sheer, remorseless self-interest. Crude scars mottled her exposed skin, each one whispering its own grisly tale and hinting at even more horrific trophies concealed beneath her unkempt attire. She moved with a deceptive, careless grace, lifting the bottle to drain another mouthful while locking eyes with Northern. Despite her drunken haze, a keen predatory intelligence glinted in those irises, marking her as anything but some helpless sot. Stop staring before I hit you with the booze, she growled, clearly sensing his intense scrutiny of her scarred visage. Yet her tone remained almost playfully indifferent as she openly assessed him with an evaluating sweep from his boots to his hair. Caressing her pointed chin contemplatively, the woman rasped, "You're the one who just awakened, eh? You look like a scrawny stick about to snap. But I've seen worse." She shrugged nonchalantly before jerking her head toward the back room and saying, "Follow me." Northern shot an uncertain glance at the bartender, who simply nodded reassuringly while deftly opening the door to grant the boy entry. Since he wasn't getting any information from his clone, yet, perhaps his lingering curiosity would finally be satisfied. Or so he thought, for the other side revealed little more than a wide stone corridor angling steadily downward into deeper shadows. If anything, the impressive, sturdy construction only served to heighten the aura of a strange unreality. Northern had expected the door to open onto some cluttered storeroom or gloomy antechamber precluding the underground training halls whispered about in the schoolyard rumors. Instead, the hallway simply spread out in an open, rectangular space around 50 square meters wide, with its floor composed of finely raked white sand that undulated with each footfall. The mysterious woman strode to the very center before wheeling around to face Northern. "Brat, what's your name?" The boy's brows furrowed slightly at the derogative word, but he responded without inflection. "Northern." His answer appeared to give the woman a momentary pause before she abruptly burst into peals of raucous, unrestrained laughter while clutching at her midsection as she gasped for breath. What the hell? You're actually named Northern." When the boy simply stared back in stony silence, her cackling tapered into a few muffled snorts before she finally fell silent, her head quizzically tilting sideways. "Really? That's seriously your name?" "Yes," Northern bit out, his tone dripping with malice. "That is my name." Registering his evident displeasure, the woman smothered her remaining mirth, shooting him a withering glare that sent an involuntary shiver racing up his spine. A sudden, visceral sense of menace flooded Northern's psyche, triggering an instinctive urge to avert his gaze and compose himself lest he inadvertently provoke lethal consequences. When she finally spoke again, the drifter's gravelly tone rang with sobriety. "Listen carefully, Northern," she said, barely stifling another contemptuous snort. "I'll be in charge of your evaluation, which I normally despise, although truth be told, I was quite the big shot back in my day. But certain matters transpired, and these days I tutor the rabble who are too meek, destitute, or feckless to enroll in the academy. For all I know, you could end up being one of my permanent students, boy." A tight frown creased Northern's features as he mentally rejected that possibility. Public citadels primarily existed to monitor newly awakened walkers, testing and equipping them with the bare essentials for their first foray into rifts. Basic survival skills to endure that harrowing transition. Some, like this particular establishment, also focused on cultivating full-fledged drifters as collectives for rift harvesting operations. Whether privately or state-owned, citadels represented the first exploratory foothold beyond the academy's sheltered cloisters. The woman clapped her hands together, the sharp sound snapping Northern's wandering attention back to her. "Pay attention, brat." He bristled slightly at her demeaning manner but remained outwardly stoic as she resumed explaining in clipped tones. "Two parts to the exam. First is the practical and likely the easiest part for a snot-nosed whelp like you. All you need do is come at me with every attack in your arsenal. And yes, that means using your talent to its fullest extent." She paused meaningfully before adding, "The second part involves using a specialized apparatus to quantify and classify your talent's basic parameters, even if it reads out as utter trash. However, an exceptional practical showing could still earn you a top-tier recommendation." One calloused finger tapped the pocket containing her folded missive. "Believe me, with my endorsement letter, you're virtually guaranteed admission at the academy. At least, then you'd have adequate time to train more before your second awakening." Northern's eyes narrowed skeptically. Who is this woman to guarantee such? He inscrutably studied her for several seconds before the sudden tremor of her foot meeting the sand floor made him stagger, breaking his composure. A tremendous quaking began, nearly unbalancing the reeling Northern as his heart hammered, threatening to burst from his chest. Fixing him with a nasty smirk, the woman purred. Nice. So you do possess the sense to tremble before true power. Good. Now let's see what you're made of, whelp. With a feral shout, Northern exploded into motion, propelling himself across the clearing with every ounce of speed at his command. Fist pulled back, he closed those final meters with the mysterious woman squarely in his sights, heedless of her seeming nonchalance as she sipped from her perpetually half-filled bottle. Yet, razor-edged instincts that have been cultivated from countless mock battles with Shin shrilled with a warning, the fine hairs prickling along the nape of his neck. Obeying that irrefutable sixth sense, Northern wrenched himself into an awkward evasion at the last possible moment. A fraction too late to feel the blur of air carving the space his torso had just occupied. The ground ruptured with titanic force as something unseen carved a vicious burrow through the pristine sand. Northern skidded to a jarring halt, gaping wide-eyed and panting heavily at the blatant display of unearthly power. She could have split him in two with literally no effort whatsoever. A chill slithered down his spine as that realization sank home, cold sweat beading his pallid brow. Thanks to his instincts, he was able to afford a split-second window to evade the lethal strike. This drunken enigma possessed the deadliness to effortlessly extinguish his life before he could even blink. Yet she remained utterly bored, nonplussed by his desperate defensive action. Stunned awe-ward with burgeoning terror across Northern's features as he finally understood the truth. If he had heeded those ingrained instincts even a tiny bit more sluggishly, he would now be two sundered pieces of flesh and bones slumped across the obliterated sand. The scornful woman merely laughed again, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, I honestly didn't expect you to evade that. I suppose you've got a decent combat sense, at least. Fishing a scrap of parchment and quill from some concealed pocket, she swiftly scribbled an indecipherable notation before roughly folding and stowing it away. The point of this evaluation is assessing your practical talent, she drawled, focusing her single lambent eye fully on him once more. Which means you need to actually, use it. Unless. Her tone adopted a mocking lilt as a new realization struck her. Wait, don't tell me. Is your talent speed-based? Northern minutely shook his head in the negative, his expression hardening to one of grim wariness as their gazes locked, electric tension rising between them. She made a dismissive TSK. Good. Because that would have been dreadfully disappointing. The silence stretched on as Northern remained rooted to the spot, refusing to be further baited into banter until the keening edge of mortal peril had dimmed from his honed instincts. Finally, the master sighed. How old are you, brat? 14. He responded automatically. Nearly 15. Something flickered in her eye, perhaps approval or even a nostalgic recognition. Huh, an early bloomer. Lucky you. A predatory grin slowly curled her lips as Northern's tentative facade of bravado crumbled beneath her resurgent, suffocating aura of threat. Her stance shifted with subtle menace, hips cocked sideways and hands resting insolently on her belt. Try not to piss yourself, boy. I may be rough, but I won't outright kill you. Yet everything about the smoldering drifter, from her body language to the intensity of her eye to the glint of feral amusement, said the exact opposite. That to perform inadequately before her would surely spell a death sentence. And recalling that casual display of shearing lethality moments prior, Northern couldn't restrain a convulsive, full-body shudder of abject, mortal dread. If their earlier clash represented pulling her punches, suffering the full brunt of this Goliath's unfettered might didn't bear contemplation. No, I can't be paralyzed like this. He savagely rebuked his fear, straightening his spine in determination. Even facing that abomination earlier, I didn't feel such crippling terror. There's something deeper at play here. Northern's gaze sharpened to laser focus as realization gradually dawned on him. You didn't actually attack me. Not physically, at least. The words tumbled out in a breathless rush, his tenor quavering slightly beneath the omnipresent pressure boring into his psyche. Her visible eye widened fractionally before her lips formed a lopsided grin. Well, I'll be. So the little whelp does have a modicum of sense after all. Tossing back a long pull of cheap booze, The flame-haired drifter nonchalantly tossed the bottle over one shoulder, where it shattered against the far wall in an explosion of sound and glass shards. As she began closing the distance separating them, Northern felt the malevolent aura crushing his mind, intensifying with every ponderous stride. What you're experiencing is spiritual pressure, the ability to emanate one's quintessential soul essence outward through their aura. A relatively simple technique, for a master anyway. Being a master meant reaching the vagrant soul rank. It was not the loftiest of heights, yet still stratospherically distant from a raw awakener like himself. If Shin's casual displays of mastery were anything to judge by, before Northern could ponder that alarming thought further, the baleful entity loomed directly before him, near enough for him to smell the boozy smell of stale alcohol wafting from her imposing figure. His legs began trembling uncontrollably, pathetic quivers racing throughout his body as the pressure peaked, constricting his very breath. One calloused hand shot out to clench his shoulder, merciless fingers digging into his flesh until he cried out involuntarily. As that baleful vermilion eye bored into his very soul, the drifter's voice sliced through his mind's hazy desperation with lancing clarity. "I've decided to take you seriously, North boy." The tone on that final syllable dripped with searing venom. "You're the first worthwhile prospect to catch my eye in ages." Chapter 11. Evaluation Test, Part 2. Everything changed about the atmosphere the moment the lady declared. Northern felt himself pressed upon by a heavy force, only that there was no visible heavy force. Whatever this was, his guess was that it was the lady's talent ability and he had to deal with it somehow. But how? He was impressive thus far. He had learnt a lot and even managed to several times outsmart those kids back in the countryside who were newly awakened. Other things he had learnt from several practice duels from his father. But he didn't take any class on dealing with talent. More importantly, he had never thought about a talent like this one. If her talent allowed her to instill fear in her opponent, under what type would it be? Scholar? Hunter? No, the entire prejudice was wrong. She was clearly a hunter class from the way she spoke about spiritual release. Northern gritted his teeth as he tried to resist. The way the lady looked, her brute appearance, the scars and in her feral face. She gave off the vibe of someone that would be more powerful than his own father. He came out once and he already met two people that could be far stronger than his father. To think his father was actually the strongest in the countryside. Northern could be missing a lot staying hidden in that place, and he was beginning to realize it. "What?" The lady clicked her tongue. "A moment ago you were looking very cocky. Now you can't raise your head anymore?" Northern was struggling with the effect of the pressure upon his head. It was incredibly hard for him to resist the domineering force that pressed him down, and it was even harder to breathe in her presence. There was no way out. Almost. Northern narrowed his eyes to a slit as a possibility occurred to him. Currently, the lady's talent ability was solely focused on him. What if she had the ability that enabled her to target a person and not an area? That should change everything, right? All he just needed was 1 second of relapse, and for him to get it, he needed an element of surprise. A devilish smile formed on his face, even though his head was bowed and being pressed down. The woman could feel that the young kid was happy about something. The pressure on Northern suddenly increased. He fell to his knee and coughed out blood. The lady raised a brow as she saw him. Her countenance broke apart, pity filling in. She lifted her hand to stop it but frowned the next second. "Gotcha." She swung her face to the side. It was too late for her. Her feral face was met by the flying punch of another Northern whom she had no idea where he had come from. Northern smiled and slowly rose up. To her shock, the Northern in front of her shattered and became a dust. A tense frown covered her face. She didn't understand what was going on. "I've been fighting a clone all the while?" Northern had managed to land a punch, but he wasn't having a good time with it at all. The lady's face was unscathed, unfazed. When he landed the punch, it was like he punched into a metal wall. A jolt or breaking pains ran through his hand. Till now, as the woman turned and asked the question, Northern was still dealing with the pain, swinging his hand voraciously. "Hey, brat, I'm talking to you." The lady grabbed and lifted him by the wrist of the hand that was paining him. Northern stared deadpan at her, sighing lamely before speaking. It was before you even came. I wanted to test out something with my talent ability, so I decided to place a clone at the counter while I check around the place. There were several reasons for what he did. The main reason, in fact, wasn't because he predicted a fight with the woman. Northern wanted to know how cloning worked. The thing he was most concerned about was the amount of information that the clone could receive, how information was perceived, and whether he could pass a mental command. To his surprise, everything was better than he had thought. The clone was able to perfectly mirror the things that went on in his head. For a fact, Northern felt like the clone was a better fighter than he. The informations he passed to it were executed instantaneously. There would have been an element of almost if he was the one in the fight. He seriously was considering pushing the clone to battle all the time. But then he wasn't a lazy-natured person. All this was just a coincidence. He had no plan to enter into the fight from the beginning, which meant even though he was required to do so, he wasn't going to use his talent. But some things began to spiral out of his speculations. 1. He thought the fear being instilled in him was the woman's talent ability. If it was, why was the system not asking if he wanted to copy it? 2. His clone was doing an amazing job containing the whole situation but was a few seconds away from breaking apart. And he could feel it vividly in his own body. When the clone shattered and dissipated, it felt like a small part of himself had returned. And that was the summary of all that had happened. Yes. Yet, the whole scenario from the woman's point of view was different. She clenched her teeth, her brows furrowed viciously. You dare to deceive me? It was not my fault that you didn't notice that I have been using my talent since the beginning. Fine, let's say, I played too smart for you to catch on to. You were so focused on using your talent ability to deal with me that you couldn't detect an attack from behind. Northern continued coldly. Trust me, if I was half as strong as you are, you would have died twice. Firstly, when you decided to use spiritual release and didn't attack me for real because I most definitely would have seen it coming. Secondly, just now. The boy's words were annoyingly right. Annette was a very strong awakened. She was feared even amongst her peers, and was an experienced hunter who had even lost one of her eyes to a rift raid. She was strong enough to be recruited and given special treatment by the headmaster of the public citadel of Crownder City, even though she had a lousy character and was an unredeemable drunkard. She was special, and it wasn't just because of her strength. The complications and speciality of her talent ability also contributed to it. And someone like her was outsmarted by a kid? How? How did you do it? Northern replied, he with a bored look, saying nothing. How did you sneak up behind me? She yelled at him. A frown fell on his face. What a nice way to ask for guidance. The lady repelled her head, her brows frowning unbelievably. There was no trick to it. You were focused on him, I just needed to make the timing be when you were more focused than usual, which happened the last minute. I crawled all the way, then last minute I jumped with my punch, which was pretty much useless as you can see. He pointed dully to the hand she was holding. To think she'd been had with such simplicity. Did I loosen up too much because there was nothing to worry about, or have I just gotten rusty since I lost my eye? Annette sneered and released his wrist. He threw her an irritated scowl before caressing the poor wrist. While he was doing that, Annette brought out a piece of paper and scribbled a few things, then tucked it back in. The life in her expression had died since Northern finished giving his explanation. She turned unceremoniously and said as she walked away, "Follow me. We'll be conducting the second part of the test indoors." Chapter 12. Senile Young Boy. Gilbert and the 10-year-old-looking boy were seated in an office with slanted rays of sunlight filtering through the window and lending a warm radiance to the space while banishing strange shadows to the corners. Ruffsberg glanced around before remarking, "You still keep those here?" His voice trailed off as he eyed the lingering shadows, prompting the headmaster to fix him with a serious expression and causing the atmosphere to become taut with tension. After a prolonged silence, Ruffsberg sighed and shook his head. "You are an excruciatingly dull human being. When will that ever change?" Gilbert shrugged, his serious expression unwavering as he regarded the boyish figure seated across from him, separated by a round table bearing 2 coffee mugs. Finally, Gilbert's gruff voice rumbled forth, laced with respect. "Why are you here?" Ruffsburg took a cursory sip of his coffee before responding, a hint of mischief in his tone. "It's nothing serious. After being cooped up in Milgard for centuries, can't an old friend enjoy a change of scenery now that there's a new principal?" Gilbert stared at him blankly for a few beats before replying. "No, I know you too well. You didn't travel over 800 kilometers just to catch up with old friends or for some fresh air." "Cut the lies, Grandmaster Ruffsburg." After Gilbert's statement, Ruffsburg's face crumpled comically, as if he were about to burst into tears. But his expression swiftly morphed into wistfulness as he retorted, "Isn't this child's face amazing? Gosh, I can scarcely remember the last time I was an actual kid." He traced his youthful features with small fingers as he mused aloud. "Are you going to keep beating around the bush?" Gilbert pressed, his patience waning. "Things are getting serious at the border," Ruffsburg said, his tone taking on a somber edge that commanded Gilbert's rapt attention. "I wish there was something that could have been done to prevent the entire continent from falling to the monsters. Every time I dwell on the past, I'm consumed with self-loathing over such a grievous mistake. The misfortune that befell Celia could have been averted if the leaders of the Central Plains had acted decisively. But ultimately, the fault lies with me for waiting on them." He sighed heavily before taking a contemplative sip of his coffee. "But what is done is done. If we don't take swift action, the protectors won't be enough to stop those monsters from encroaching on the Central Plains." "But the Central Plains is different," Gilbert protested. "Of all 5 continents, ours is the most civilized." "But not the strongest," Ruffsburg interrupted, his eyes hardening as a frown creased his boyish features. "I've witnessed drifters from the northern continent who surpassed even our mightiest. I fear that if monsters begin seeping into our lands, coupled with the growing plague of rifts, it won't be long before we too are cast into the depths of oblivion." His voice thickened with deep-rooted pain and quiet desperation. "Nothing will remain of us. Nothing." Gilbert watched him impassively, allowing the heavy silence to linger before speaking in a measured tone. His eyes lowered. "I suppose you've come here because you have a solution in mind?" Ruffsburg leaned back, his dangling legs barely brushing the floor. "Yes, I have a solution, and I need you to see it through." Gilbert's eyes slid shut as he shook his head wearily. "We've had this discussion before, Master Ruffsburg. Under no circumstances will I return to the Academy. There is no place for me there any longer." "Gilbert, listen to me." Gilbert raised his gaze to meet Ruffsburg's intense stare. "I have a plan to cultivate a special batch of students." Gilbert squinted skeptically as the boyish figure continued talking undeterred. "They are going to be different from any of the drifters that have ever been seen before. I intend to forge them through the harshness of the dark continent itself." "Stop!" Gilbert's voice sliced through the air with such sharp intensity that he had never heard. "I know exactly what you're scheming, Master Ruffsburg. You need to say no more. I spent 30 years in your service. After all, I understand how your mind works. You want to round up a group of students and abandon them at the heart of a monster-ruled continent." Ruffsburg averted his gaze, his expression guarded but telling. Seeing that reaction, Gilbert knew he had struck the heart of the matter. Ruffsburg had indeed intended to send a contingent of youths into the nightmarish depths of the Dark Continent. It was so intrinsically him, to go to any lengths, no matter how extreme or unjust it was, to achieve his end. Ruffsburg cared not for the means, only the results, a disquieting trait that made Gilbert incredibly wary of the ancient man-child. "It makes no sense." He raised his voice, leaning forward as he gesticulated frantically. "Grandmaster Ruffsburg, you're going to take actual people and consign them to the heart of a monster-infested land simply to protect our continent? You know fully well that they won't last a single day in that hellish place." Ruffsburg waved his small hand dismissively. "What do you mean, going to? Don't you think it's a tad late to be lecturing me about changing course?" Gilbert's face drained of color as realization set in.
"No."
"You didn't." But Ruffsburg nodded his childlike head smugly. Oh yes, I did. This project began 3 years ago. I've already sent 3 batches of students there so far and lost all communication with them. They're dead. The words passed through Gilbert's throat like glass shards. No, they're not, Ruffsberg countered, shaking his head. I created a life lantern for each and every one of them. Some have perished, yes, but that's not even a quarter of them. With 100 students per batch, 300 have been sent over the past decade. Yet I've not heard a whisper from any of them. The deaths seem quite natural to be sincere. Gilbert's brow furrowed darkly at those chilling words. Something natural? How could someone so callously regard the deaths of several students, children sent to face horrors no one should ever experience, as natural? Ruffsberg's moral rot was undeniable, but Gilbert still held immense respect for the ancient schemer. He might carry this reprehensible personality, but I owe him my life. Slowly, Gilbert controlled his inner turmoil, his eyes becoming unfocused as he retreated into deep contemplation. When he finally spoke, his tone was carefully measured. Which means they are still alive, but are stranded in a place beyond your ability to make contact. Precisely, Ruffsberg confirmed with a nod. The diminutive figure was not merely the preeminent scholar of their age. He was also a savant-rank high magus, the strongest and most erudite academic mind in the 5 continents. Ruffsberg had long since mastered the theoretical limits of scholarship, delving into the esoteric realms of conceptual magics like time, gravity, and space. It was this arcane genius that enabled him to send hundreds of students into the dark continent's depths without ever setting foot there himself. Gilbert didn't know the intricacies of how Ruffsberg had achieved such a feat, but he understood one fundamental truth. If the ancient sorcerer admitted to losing contact, then he was never meant to lose contact in the first place. A single, disquieting conclusion loomed. Does this imply some manner of anomaly? It was most likely some monster we've never encountered, Ruffsberg stated gravely. There are hundreds upon hundreds we've yet to catalog, Master Ruffsberg, Gilbert pointed out. True, but this one feels different. Ruffsberg leaned forward, his eyes alight with determined curiosity. Damn it, you know how finely tuned my instincts are, Gilbert. Something is lurking in that forsaken land that has eluded all our notice thus far, and I intend to unravel its secrets. Gilbert sighed, knowing that there was no way to sway the ancient schemer when his mind was made up. For all his moral shortcomings, Ruffsberg's contributions to the Central Plains were immeasurable. Besides, it wasn't as if Gilbert could refuse. If Ruffsberg had gone to such lengths to ensnare him, the boyish figure was undoubtedly prepared to ensure his compliance, willing or not. Devious and underhanded, but quintessentially Ruffsberg's way. After a moment's hesitation, Gilbert gave voice to his dread. So what do you need from me this time? A sly smile played across Ruffsberg's lips, sending a chill down Gilbert's spine. That unsettling grin concealed something he desperately did not want to contemplate. No way would Master Ruffsberg be that rotten. It's just my mind playing tricks. Yet the gleam in those ageless eyes seemed to confirm his worst fear. Do you need me to say it? Or have you already puzzled out the answer? Ruffsberg taunted. With a shaky voice, Gilbert spoke the unthinkable. You want me to teach the next batch of students about survival? He loathed teaching with every fiber of his being, a fact Ruffsberg was keenly aware of, which meant the depraved ancient took perverse delight in foisting such torments upon him. To Gilbert's immense relief, Ruffsberg waved off that notion dismissively. Nah, I know how much you despise teaching. Why would I ever do that to you? His heart had nearly faltered, but it steadied again at the boyish figure's words. However, what came next was far, far worse. Leaning forward with a wicked glint in his eyes, Ruffsberg announced with sadistic glee, I want you to accompany the next batch of students into the heart of the Dark Continent. Chapter 13. A Gem Has Appeared, Part 1. Gilbert froze, his eyes glazing over as a profound wave of disillusionment washed over him. This was the height of rottenness. Thinking again, no. What had he ever expected from someone like Ruffsberg? Did I truly forget just how rotten this man can be? The very request should have been endearing considering the sort of man Ruffsberg was. Gilbert was no ordinary drifter, even formidable ones like Annette and Danzo paled in comparison. Before him, they were mere amateurs. Gilbert was among the rare few in the continent who was capable of fighting alongside the former Academy principal himself. Being an amazing drifter, one that had received a true name and was a sage, Gilbert surpassed the likes of Shin and the drunkard Annette by 2 ranks. Drifters of his caliber were a rarity, found only within exclusive clans and private citadels. Yet Gilbert was far more amazing than even those elite few, a consequence of the terrifying experiences he had gained delving into rifts from a tender age. To Ruffsberg, he was indispensable, the perfect individual to spearhead a project of this magnitude. If anyone could survive at the heart of a monster-infested wilderness, it would be him. However, for such a dangerous request to be brought before a man of Gilbert's caliber was nothing short of galling. Even coming from the former Academy principal himself, it felt like a deliberate insult, a blatant invitation to march to his own demise. A terrifying act that only a rotten human like Ruffsberg could conceive. A part of Gilbert wanted to acquiesce. Just as he had initially thought, he was sure this cunning sorcerer hadn't come here without a plan to drag him into this, voluntarily or not. Gilbert was convinced Ruffsberg's audacity stemmed from a misguided attempt at benevolence. He respected Ruffsberg, but allowing the old man to demean his value in such a way didn't sit well with him. After all, what was this crazy request if not an insult of the highest order? Lowering his head, Gilbert allowed the shadows that had been banished to the room's corners to creep inward, curling around his feet. Ruffsberg glanced around as his face contorted into a menacing grin, observing the truly pissed-off Gilbert. Hey, you're not going to use that on me, are you? Ruffsberg uttered in a playful voice, lifting his legs as the shadows stretched towards his feet. Gilbert's face was heavily shadowed, devoid of any trace of humor or playfulness as his eyes became swallowed by a horrific murkiness. Ruffsberg gulped audibly as he beheld the brawny old man's imposing figure. Finally, Gilbert's voice rolled out with a frightening resonance that seemed to make the very ground tremble. "What do you think you're doing, Grandmaster Ruffsberg?" The shadows beneath him spiked dangerously, forcing Ruffsberg to draw his legs higher. However, just then, Danzo burst in, swinging his sword in a wide arc. The black steel released a whistling sound as it parted the shadows which hastily retreated back to the corners, shrinking and shivering. Danzo turned to Gilbert, his expression turning thunderous. "Sir Gilbert, what is the meaning of this? Do you intend to harm the principal in his weakened state?" Ma'am. Ruffsberg nodded with feigned self-pity as Danzo rebuked Gilbert. Sighing, Gilbert shook his head. "You are as uptight as ever. I hope it does not lead to your own demise." He raised his eyes to meet the grinning Ruffsberg's gaze, his face turning cold. "I do not trust your ways, at the very least. I can vouch that your intentions are true, but I do not have an answer to your request yet. I will seriously consider it and get back to you later." Finishing his piece, Gilbert stood, casting a glance at the cleanly cut groove in the concrete floor where Danzo's blade had struck. The area had been split cleanly in half. Gilbert's eyes returned to Danzo, then moved to the tip of the black blade pointing towards the ground. The floor had been no ordinary surface. It was a creation of the great Mark Gudbranson, one of the Central Plains' finest constructors. Even a master's attack should not have left a mark. "He has progressed." Before Gilbert could ponder it further, Ruffsberg rose with a stern expression, though a remnant of his senile smile lingered. "You don't understand, Gilly." The old man paused, his smile widening wickedly. "What I asked of you was never a request. I mean, we could go through the ugly route if that's what you want." Ruffsberg shrugged nonchalantly, his wicked grin making his intentions abundantly clear. "I regret the day I became entangled with you. To think I once trusted someone like this." Gilbert looked at Danzo, the corners of his lips turned down as he shook his head a moment later. The poor man was overly committed to serving and protecting the Academy principal, despite no one having the power to truly harm him. It was an ugly lie that Ruffsburg was at his weakest after his body swap. Gilbert had once witnessed the terrifying might of his power shortly after such a transition. Ruffsburg was a genuinely terrifying creature, and Gilbert didn't want to dwell on how bad things could get. He knew, deep down, that he would ultimately take this path. He'd had no choice from the beginning. It was ugly and annoying, but Ruffsburg always ensured things went entirely his way. Tension hung thick in the air as Ruffsburg's words were met with stony silence from Gilbert. The brawny old man glared at his former principal with as much hostility as he could risk. Any more would be disrespectful and provoke Danzo's ire. The last thing he wanted was to pick a fight with a protector when he was not yet back in peak condition. Just then, a heavy tremor shook the entire building. Gilbert's face paled. Even Ruffsburg's eyes widened momentarily before a dangerously elated spark flickered to life within them, his lips curling into a triumphant sneer. "A gem! A gem has appeared!" he shouted excitedly. Chapter 14. A Gem Has Appeared, Part 2. Instead of retracing their steps, Northern and Annette turned left, following a branching hallway that led them to a set of double doors that opened into a chamber. Upon entering, Northern's gaze fell on two other workers, beautiful women dressed in crisp white tops and form-fitting black miniskirts that accentuated the curves of their hips. Their raven tresses cascaded just below their shoulders, framing faces with eyes as razor-sharp as a dagger's edge. One look told Northern all he needed to know. These were vipers, created to kill with comely grace and little else. They offered polite smiles and shallow bows as he and Annette stepped into the gray-painted chamber, the drab color scheme lending an air of cold dullness that made their expressions seem all the more unsettling. Ahead loomed another door, undoubtedly leading to the room housing the talent evaluation machine itself. "What? Got a problem with my sheet?" Annette growled, her voice carrying an unmistakable threatening edge. The viper clearly had an issue with it, but wisely chose to swallow whatever retort danced on her lips. With a smoothing of features, she straightened the paper, only for her eyes to widen fractionally upon noting the grade bestowed by Annette. "Wow, a plus? He must have really impressed you." Her counterpart leaned over to inspect the anomaly, her eyes going comically wide. "Eh? Really? Annette gave someone an A+? Kid, you must be a seriously big deal." Northern wasn't sure if the mark boded well for him, so he simply offered a slight nod and maintained his silence. "What? Will you answer me and open the door before I smash your skull in?" Annette shouted impatiently. "Coming right through." The hazel-eyed woman sprang to obey, an eerie smile stretching her lips as she approached the door. Placing her hand upon it, some manner of biometric security was activated, prompting the barrier to slide open with a low hiss. Following Annette's wake, Northern stepped through the narrow entranceway, only to find himself in a far more expansive chamber dominated by a towering crystal pillar that pulsed with an inner radiance at its center. As the viper led them further inside, he noted an array of panels and glowing conduits snaking across the pillar's base, carrying a luminescent fluid that seemed to be the source of the eerie illumination. "It's amazing!" The awestruck whisper slipped unbidden from his lips. "I know, right?" the woman replied with a sidelong look. "This is just one of the many wonders to be found inside rifts. If you ever get the chance to enter one, be sure to explore thoroughly before sealing it." While she busied herself operating the controls, Northern hung back, drinking in the incredible sight before him with unabashed fascination. After a few minutes of meticulous preparation, the viper turned and beckoned him over with a warm, yet still disconcertingly predatory smile. "All you need to do is place your hand on the pillar and use your talent." Northern's gaze met hers, and beneath the polished veneer of beauty, he saw the glint of a killer's feral cunning in those sharp eyes. Just what manner of people made up the ranks of this citadel? Turning his scrutiny aside, he cautiously approached the humming crystal pillar and extended his hand to rest upon its translucent surface. When the viper gave an encouraging nod, he closed his eyes and split his consciousness in two. The moment he did that, a strange system alert manifested in his mind's eye. System notice. A large amount of soul essence has been detected. Soul essence is being drawn into the void of your soul. Your soul is growing stronger. He could actually feel something seeping into his very being. An odd, indescribable sensation that made him furrow his brow in consternation. Raising his head to seek an explanation, Northern saw that the hazel-eyed woman had gone white, staring down at the control panel with hands that trembled violently. Annette hovered just behind her, wearing an expression of deep worry and confusion. Both women were transfixed by whatever readings were displayed before them, their demeanors reflecting a state of utter shock. Suddenly, a hairline fracture raced up the length of the pillar, starting from the point where Northern's hand made contact. Northern snatched his hand back in alarm as the chamber itself seemed to quake from some incredible force, nearly sending Annette and the Viper tumbling to the floor. Just as abruptly as the tremors began, they ceased, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. The two women gaped at the control panel, utterly perplexed. "I don't understand," the Viper murmured in confusion. A few seconds ago, the numbers had been spiking drastically, but now it says that he has no talent at all? Annette shot a bewildered look between Northern's dual forms. And he clearly does have talent, a lot of it by the look of things. Has this damn thing finally gone haywire? The other woman scowled, deeply affronted by the insult to her precious technology. It couldn't have just gone nuts. This crystal was crafted by one of the continent's finest engineers. What other explanation could there be? "Hey, I'm just calling it like I see it," Annette shot back defensively. "We both saw those numbers rocketing off the charts. That was the highest potential reading ever recorded in this citadel, as far as I know. And now it's saying 0? 0 means talentless, in case you forgot. Does that kid look even remotely talentless to you?" For once, the Viper had no snide comment to make, as her conflicted gaze shifted to the ominous, spider-like fractures spreading across the pillar's surface. Such damage should have been impossible. In fact, nothing about this situation made any sense. The chamber's doors hissed open once more, admitting a quartet of new arrivals, 3 men, including Gilbert and Danzo, accompanied by a strikingly beautiful woman who appeared to be the Viper's twin sister. At their head was the wizened, childlike figure of Ruffsberg himself, as his rapid steps carried him straight to Northern before he finally came to an abrupt halt. The ancient academic's eyes glittered with undisguised fascination as they raked over the perplexing scene laid out before him. Northern arched an inquisitive brow, shooting a sidelong look at the other occupants, all of whom seemed rooted in place, their expressions a mixture of bewilderment and trepidation as they awaited the diminutive figure's judgment. Without preamble, Ruffsberg stepped forward, reaching out to place his tiny hand against Northern's midsection. His eyes slid shut for a brief moment, then flew wide open in rapturous awe, unlike anything Northern had ever witnessed. Slowly, reverently, Ruffsberg turned to regard Gilbert, the room's tension reaching an unbearable crescendo. When the ancient scholar finally spoke, his voice emerged as a harsh, trembling rasp. This is amazing." Ruffsberg's eyes seemed to become ablaze with a passionate fervor as the reedy words gave way to a vibrant cry of pure, unbridled jubilation. "This is so incredible. Truly, a magnificent gem." Chapter 15. Anomaly. After the dramatic events and Ruffsberg's theatrics, Northern was eventually issued an official rank card, the standard identification bestowed upon all drifters. It stated the necessary information: name, talent, talent class, soul rank, and Citadel affiliation, if applicable. Northern regarded his card with a measure of disquiet, not entirely pleased with what he saw inscribed on it. While he had indeed been evaluated as talentless, the saving grace was Annette's A+ evaluation grade. That stellar assessment would plant seeds of doubt in the minds of many, causing them to think twice before dismissing him as weak. It didn't make up for the talentless designation, but it was something. Another boon that filled him with quiet elation was that after all the turmoil, Ruffsberg himself had spoken with Shin, penning a special letter of recommendation for Northern. He was being offered a fully sponsored scholarship to attend the academy, and he was expected to depart alongside Ruffsberg in just 2 days. Shin had tried to dissuade him, but the wizened former principal brushed aside his protestations with sly nonchalance. Since I am no longer the academy's head, such matters lie outside my jurisdiction. The North boy must accompany me, so that I might vouch for him there, you understand? With those words, any further objection from Shin seemed futile. They would have to let Northern go, for the ancient schemer's machinations allowed no other option. Knowing his son, Shin suspected that the prospect of him leaving so soon after reuniting filled Northern with quiet anguish, though they would strive to make the looming separation as bearable as possible. Soon, they arrived back at their humble cottage, Shin slowing his stride to regard Northern with a warm, paternal gaze. "What is it?" Northern asked, his voice small and uncertain. "I don't know." Shin sighed, shaking his head slowly. "You know how your mother can be. She'll be heartbroken that you have to leave so soon. 2 days. His voice took on a bitter edge. "We never envisioned this at all." Northern's eyes slid shut as he exhaled on a weary breath. "I understand, Father. I didn't foresee it happening this quickly either. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity we may never get again if we let it slip through our fingers. I want nothing more than to remain by your side. But I also yearn to grow strong enough to protect you both and become a man of substance." His words rang with sincerity, yet were masterful lies interwoven with delicate threads of truth. Shin's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he brushed a sleeve across them, and swallowed hard against the lump of bitterness in his throat. "You're so mature you don't even give this old man a chance to be a proper father. That's just unfair." A small, reassuring smile tugged at the corner of Northern's mouth as he reached out to gently pat his father's arm. Continuing down the road, the quaint cottage soon came into view, with 3 steeds tethered to the wooden fence that demarcated the modest dwelling. One was a shaggy, coal-black beast that put Northern uncomfortably in mind of the feral creature they'd encountered just yesterday. No sooner had the sound of their approach reached Aisha's ears than the radiant woman emerged, a brilliant smile lighting up her features. That warm expression swiftly dimmed, however, as she took in Shin's somber countenance. The dusky glow of evening descended, shrouding the countryside in a melancholic pall as Shin quietly relayed the bittersweet news, prompting Aisha's eyes to well with sorrowful tears. "Elsewhere, I fail to comprehend your reasoning for extending such a generous offer to that boy," Gilbert said, shaking his head. Regardless of the anomalies, his evaluation clearly marked him as talentless. Thus, by all metrics, he is talentless. "But you saw it with your own eyes," Ruffsberg countered calmly. "He possesses the ability to clone himself," Gilbert scoffed. "It could have been any manner of illusion or trick, an isolated anomaly at best. You cannot be seriously entertaining." "Gilly," Ruffsberg cut him off, his piercing gaze remaining fixed on the cracked crystal pillar as he idly stroked his chin. "This crystal construct, I gifted it to you, did I not?" Caught off guard by the random question, Gilbert could only respond with a confused, "Yes. And if I recall correctly," the diminutive figure mused, "it originated from a Tier 5 rift, yes?" An odd chill rippled down Gilbert's spine at the ancient scholar's eerily tranquil tone. "Why, yes, that's correct." A weighted silence stretched between them before Gilbert felt compelled to ask, "Why do you ask?" "Gilly." When Ruffsberg spoke again, his reedy voice seemed to freeze the very air around them. "This crystal is meant to be indestructible. It required the combined efforts of myself and 2 other vagrant rank drifters just to extract it from its primal source." Gilbert's eyes flew wide as the profound implications rose in his mind. That should be impossible." "Precisely, Gilly." A slow, unsettling smile curved Ruffsberg's lips as his small hand traced the hairline fractures. "For a mere walker to inflict such damage, it should be utterly impossible." The words hung heavy between them as the wizened scholar murmured, "Its essence has been drained by nearly half." Ruffsberg's smile bloomed into a full, childlike peal of laughter that echoed dissonantly through the chamber as he staggered away from the crystal, leaving Gilbert to gape at him in utter bewilderment. To the grizzled drifter's understanding, such an event should have been a dire omen. A potential sign that this unassuming youth concealed abilities and power unfathomable for one so newly awakened. Perhaps he was a foreign agent, a drifter of immense skill masquerading as a novice? Even in their enlightened era, new talents still surfaced to mystify the masses. This should have been cause for grave alarm and thorough investigation from the high mages, yet Ruffsburg clearly did not share his trepidation from his manic amusement that was all too apparent. When at last the eerie laughter subsided, the ancient academic turned to regard Gilbert, a deeply unsettling grin still playing about his lips. "Gilly, in all that you do, I want you to keep the keenest of observations trained on that boy. I have the most peculiar feeling about him. It could manifest in any number of ways, but rest assured, I intend to retain full control over whatever destiny awaits him." At that moment, the full, horrifying depth of Ruffsburg's aims finally dawned on Gilbert, and his voice emerged as a strangled rasp. You mean to send him to the Dark Continent? Without even informing his parents?" Ruffsburg's nonchalant shrug spoke volumes. "I care nothing for such trivialities. The boy is special. He belongs among my other special acquisitions." Gilbert's brow furrowed as full realization set in like lead in his gut. "No, you're not merely intrigued. You're wary of him, you fear whatever potential he may represent. You want me to either tame him or discard him entirely." Ruffsburg paused, angling his head to meet Gilbert's gaze over his bony shoulder. The cold, grim determination etched onto his childlike visage sent an involuntary shudder racing down the hunter's spine. "I'm pleased you've grasped the nuances of your task," the ancient figure intoned flatly. "I expect nothing less than monumental things from you and your team, Gilbert. For all our sakes." With those ominous words hanging in the air, Ruffsburg spun on his heel and strode out of the chamber without a backward glance, leaving Gilbert alone with his sickening sense of dread and rapidly splintering convictions. Chapter 16. Farewell. The day dawned early, as twin moons clung lazily to the bright sky, one hovering slightly lower than the other, against a warm, violet glow spreading above the eastern horizon. Northern had finished packing in anticipation of his impending departure to join Ruffsburg. Wanting to meet the former principal very early to ensure that they didn't miss their transport, he reasoned that there was no such thing as too premature a start time. Or perhaps, his eagerness to finally leave the Everonian countryside was making him restless. That errant thought brought a pang of guilt, for the prevailing mood around him since the announcement of his academy enrollment had been very somber, as these past few days had been melancholic. The village folk had turned out in force, bestowing him with an array of parting gifts and well wishes. Among the items was a seemingly ordinary crossbody bag blessed with the miracle of infinite space. Whether woven by a skilled engineer or retrieved from the depths of a rift, marvels like these were not uncommon in their world. Thanks to its boundless interior, stowing his newfound trove of gifts proved a simple task, though Northern certainly discarded a few useless offerings while urging his mother to remain discreet about the minor ingratitude. In addition to the crossbag, his belongings found themselves neatly packed into a sturdy leather travel satchel, for Aisha had insisted he maintain at least a veneer of dignified formality. They wouldn't have the world thinking her son some slovenly vagabond lacking even a proper set of clothes. By the time the day-star rose to the horizon in all its radiant glory, banishing the twin moons with its warm, golden luminance, Northern, Shin, and Aisha stood together outside their humble abode. Aisha's expression was pinched, her lips pressed into a taut line as she struggled to restrain her turbulent emotions. Stepping forward, Northern took her hands in his, offering a reassuring smile before leaning in to place a tender kiss on her cheek. A furious blush stained Aisha's features at the tender gesture, prompting Shin to glance away shyly. So only your mother gets a goodbye kiss?" A voice huffed in feigned indignation. Northern's lips quirked upwards in a half-smirk as he scoffed lightly at his father's antics. Turning his full attention back to Aisha, he spoke in a soft, conspiratorial tone. "I hope it's a girl, and I want her name to be Silver." Aisha's eyes went comically wide as the implication sank in. You knew the whole time? Since the very first day, he admitted with a faint nod. I had my suspicions, but only confirmed them today. If you had simply denied it, I would have thought myself mistaken. See, Shin exclaimed, elation and pride written all over his features. You were totally had by our son's cleverness. It was a rare delight to be on the other end of Northern's acute perceptiveness for once. Shin's momentary triumph was short-lived, however, as Aisha shot him a withering glare that instantly robbed him of his mirth. He knew better than anyone just how apt she was at fireball discipline, literally. Aisha's expression softened once more as she returned her gaze to Northern, gracing him with a warm, sunlight smile. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about it sooner. I wanted it to be a surprise. Leaning in close, Northern murmured with all sincerity, I really do hope it's a girl. Pulling back, he lifted his leather satchel with a remorseful smile. I should get going now, Mother. Aisha blinked rapidly to dispel the sheen of unshed tears forming in her eyes as she pulled her son into one final, bone-crushing embrace, whispering farewells and well-wishes against the crown of his head. As the emotional farewell drew to a close, Shin guided Northern away, the pair coming to a halt a respectable distance from the cottage. I kept the soul cores from that black beast we encountered in your bag, he said gruffly. I was initially going to just sell them and pass the proceeds on to you for spending money, but I had a change of heart. The core of a beast-rank monster command is a hefty price. You'll see when you get to the academy. The three of them should bring you a tidy sum to use as you see fit. He pulled Northern into one last, fierce hug, his next words emerging as a rumbling rasp against his son's ear. Send letters home and don't be a stranger on the holidays, you hear? Visit when you can. Northern nodded solemnly, watching in silence as Shin slowly retreated back to the cottage and the waiting, tearful form of Aisha. There would be no need to travel all the way back to the village. Ruffsberg's missive had assured him transportation would arrive to spirit him away once his preparations were complete. He said my ride would come to collect me when I was ready, Northern mused, shifting his weight awkwardly from foot to foot as he scanned the surrounding fields and roadways for any sign of the promised conveyance. Fishing the parchment from his pocket, he unfolded it once more, reviewing the brief instructions. The time must be in the early hours of the morning. Once prepared to depart, simply step away from your dwelling, your transport shall arrive without fail. Frowning slightly, Northern glanced over his shoulder at the small cluster of watching villagers, their continued scrutiny further amplifying the awkwardness of the situation. Why wasn't anything happening yet? He'd followed the directions to the letter. As his eyes raked over the contents one final time, the inked words suddenly blazed into shimmering luminescence, the parchment slipping free of his fingers to hover before his startled face. White-hot flames erupted from the hovering parchment, hungrily consuming the fluttering note in a spiraling vortex of mystical fire. In the next instant, Northern found himself utterly enveloped in a blinding pillar of gleaming light. For a fleeting moment, confusion reigned. How was this even possible? He'd never witnessed or learned of any ability like. Whatever questions sprang to his lips swiftly fell away as the searing radiance intensified, banishing all thoughts from Northern's senses as reality itself seemed to splinter apart around him. That's an S-grade teleportation spell. Shin made to lunge forward, only to be stayed by Aisha's firm grip. Only an evanescent rank could even attempt something like that. In other words, a grandmaster. He imbued an activation trigger directly into the letter itself? She marveled, shaking her head slowly as husband and wife watched the towering pillar of arcane luminance ascend skyward and consume Northern's form completely before winking out of existence entirely. Books hardly do justice to his true mastery. For several long, somber moments, the pair stood in respectful silence, gazing heavenward at the empty skies where their son had so unceremoniously departed their lives once more. Only when the last ephemeral traces of the spell had fully dissipated did they turn as one, retreating into the solitary confines of their home to await whatever tidings the future might bring. Northern's eyes slid open, only to be immediately greeted by the sight of rich, crimson upholstery. A small but exquisitely appointed cabin aboard what he could only assume was some form of airborne transport. Seated opposite him were two identically garbed women with sharp, obsidian tresses cropped to chin-length bobs, their piercing gazes giving him the overwhelming sense of vipers lying in wait for some unsuspecting prey. Another feminine figure occupied the space beside them, long vermilion locks obscuring her features as she dozed with a quiet snore. Closest to him, and ensconced in the plush accommodations, reclined a grizzled, brawny man Northern instantly recognized as Gilbert, although he sported a slightly askew set of reading spectacles as his eyes traced the pages of some weighty tome. As if sensing the weight of Northern's scrutiny, the fellow glanced up with a curt nod and perfunctory smile. What in the ever-loving? Northern's mind spun as he drank in the bizarre scene laid out before him. This was certainly not what he'd envisioned when picturing his journey to the academy. Had Ruffsburg enacted some clandestine scheme without his knowledge? The slightest of frowns creased his brow as he regarded the silent figure of Gilbert. "Excuse me. Where exactly are we headed?" Gilbert paused in his reading to turn his full attention on the confused young man, the edges of his mouth quirking upwards in a reassuring smile. "Where else? We're bound for Milgard Academy, of course. This transport will bear us straight to its colossal walls." Northern could only gape as his gaze drifted to the window, watching the scattered clouds whipping past in an indistinct blur of grays and whites. We're flying?" The barely voiced question escaped his lips with a dumbfounded tone. Chapter 17. School awaits. They were in a flying ship, the exterior gleaming with golden plates that caught the brilliant sunlight as they soared through the blue skies. The body of the airship moved with the structural support of black polished wood that had been lacquered to shine under the metal. Long windows of glass ran serially down the sides, allowing the passengers to gaze out through the clouds and over the landscape stretching down below. Within it, the corridors were paneled in the same dark wood as the body, giving it a sleek yet cozy feel. Plush chairs with crimson cushions were set around small tables while lamps were hooked into the walls. The cabins branched off the main passage, each one furnished just as richly as a fine hotel. At the heart of the airship were the engine rooms, full of whirring gears and hissing steam propelling them through the sky. Up on the main deck, a few people strolled about taking in the sights, while others sat in rattan chairs under shade umbrellas. The wind whipped loudly, bringing the smell of a distant storm. Crew members scurried to and fro, checking instruments and adjusting valves to keep everything running smoothly. Their aviator goggles reflected the glow of the setting sun as they sailed off toward their destination. Northern stood on the deck of the ship, bewildered as he took in the entire visage that sprawled out before his eyes, which were filled with awe at the enchanting view. Just how far has the civilization of this world gone? Northern glanced around with dancing eyes. "Now, I'm really looking forward to seeing the academy." Intrigued by the intricate workings of the aircraft, Northern decided to do some exploring beyond the lavish passenger quarters. He made his way down creaking wooden stairs to the lower decks, past whirring gears and hissing pipes releasing plumes of steam. The engine rooms pulsed with mechanical energy as crew members shoveled coal into fiery furnaces. At the rear part of the ship was the crystal room, a sealed room emitting blue lights from the tiny line of space between its metallic door and the wooden wall of the vessel. Inside the room was a blue crystal shard, resting in enchanted bindings. This crystal was a powerhouse of soul essence harvested from a rift just like the one used as a measuring device. Crystals were just one of the instrumental resources found in the rifts. They were objects that held an incredible amount of soul essence. Soul essence at first instance was seen as an energy flow that originated from one's soul. Although that theory was not wrong, at a point, intellectually awakened masters began to think otherwise. However, they soon found out that there was nothing wrong with the theory. As more things about rifts were being revealed, the theory became a fact. A fact that rifts are the greatest manifestation of souls. It sounded vague and intangible, however. There was no better theory to explain what rifts were. Of course, the fact that they linked another dimension to Ultrael was one thing that made it dangerously unique. Another was that it was a different entity from the linked dimension itself, but if harnessed rightly, rifts had the soul power needed to revolutionize the entire world of Ultrael to a level of civilization that had never been recorded by other worlds. The crystal inside this room emitted raw magical energy that allowed the ship to defy gravity and propel itself forward. Surrounding the crystal room was the engine bay with steam boilers, pistons, turbines, and gears. This machinery helped regulate, distribute, and convert the crystal's magic into controlled thrust for the propellers at the stern or rear. The steam engines were powered by coal furnaces which were powered by the stokers shoveling fuel to heat boilers that drove the steam-powered components. This reinforces the crystal magic with mechanical energy. Towards the front and side were lighter-duty steam engines for electrical, heating, and cooking, as well as cabins, galleys, and storage rooms. There was an endless amount of things to look at and take note of. The people were a sight to behold. They were from different regions and cultures, and dressed in distinct ways. While some wore neatly tailored suits with Panama hats, others dressed in light tunics, baggy pants, and tiny shoes, and most wore fancy fabrics with vibrant colors, be they male or female. It kind of insinuated to Northern that there were more of these people on the ship. He wondered if they were all going to the academy too. The journey became a little bit boring, and since he wasn't really a sociable kid, he wasn't able to strike up a conversation with anyone. His white hair often caught people's attention, and they would compliment him heartily. But Northern's reply was usually curt. As the increasing compliments eventually began to bother him, Northern spent more time in his room. After he teleported to the ship, he discovered from Gilbert that all of them had happened to teleport into the ship simultaneously, but he had arrived a little bit later. He was shown to a small corner room on the ship that hosted a small bed and a table standing next to it. On the table was a lamp and a dusty old book. Northern tried to read the book but was unable to, particularly because they were letters he couldn't read. There was nothing spectacular about a book he couldn't read. After all, several languages existed in Trael, of which he had learned two. The common one, Vaiksik, and Kruin, which was his mother's native language. He would have learned his father's as well, but even Shin wasn't fluent in it. It was a hassle learning from such a person. The languages were quite diverse. Most clans and families had different languages, but one could say they all originated from the common one. When their histories were investigated, the etymology of each word was often found to be more related to Vaiksik than any other language. Other continents also had their own language, and the Central Plain even had its own common language. I should consider delving deeper into languages too, Northern noted to himself, still gazing at the strange book he had no clue about. It could be a language belonging to any clan for all he could tell. But the mystery of his not being able to decipher it tempted him to steal it. Who knows? There could be a lot of useful information, or it could be total junk. It could be either one, but Northern's curiosity got the best of him. Northern was woken up by the harsh sound of the ship's horn. It was to signify that a stop point was being reached. Immediately he woke up. Someone brazenly kicked his door open. "Get up, brat. School awaits." Chapter 18. The Academy, Part 1. Milgard Academy was a fortress that stood in all its enigmatic glory on an island shrouded in mystery, the Sanctuary of the Crimson Shadow. This isle lay at the very heart of the vast Central Plain, and it owed its existence to the eerie sea of smoke that lurked beneath it rather than a vast expanse of water. Trael, the realm where it was located, recognized the island as one of its 9 wonders, which consists of places where unexplainable phenomena defied human comprehension. No matter how much scholars attempted to unravel the secrets behind these marvels, their efforts proved futile, for the wonders remained cloaked in mystery. As the flying ship approached, Northern peered down from the deck, his gaze meeting the unsettling sight of crimson smoke creeping eerily below. The academy itself stood fortified, surrounded by towering walls that enclosed its buildings protectively, safeguarding them from the creepy claws of the shadowy haze around it. The height of these walls was staggering, stretching so high that even from the ship's lofty trajectory, the structures within it remained obscured from view. Northern found himself pondering how they would gain entry, wondering if the vessel would need to ascend to greater heights. As if in response to his curiosity, the ship glided directly towards the wall, and Northern watched, captivated, as the air sailors skillfully folded the colossal mast and maneuvered the vessel's wheels to direct its course. With the mast folded, the ship appeared less imposing, liberated from its bulky rigging. Suddenly, a section of the immense wall parted, revealing a cavity from which an extended metallic aerial bridge unfurled. Simultaneously, a wide circular platform unfolded, and the ship slowly glided towards it, making a smooth landing. The moment had arrived. It was time for Northern to enter the academy he had long anticipated. His eyes danced with sparks of excitement as he envisioned the wonders that awaited him beyond the academy's formidable walls. Just then, a young lady approached, her raven tresses flowing gracefully in the wind. Her crimson eyes seemed to pierce through everything they beheld while exuding an intensity that hinted at a thirst for conquest. Her skin bore a warm, flawless hue, and her jet-black bangs framed her forehead, stopping just above her sharp, defined brows. Northern found himself momentarily distracted by the floral scent that lingered around her. He turned to regard her, only to avert his gaze moments later. The girl, too, met his gaze briefly before diverting her eyes, and together they stood silently, transfixed by the colossal wall that loomed before them. Just how did they build this thing? Northern broke the silence, craning his neck in a futile attempt to take in the wall's entire visage. The closer they drew, the more staggering its height appeared. The wall, a testament to architectural mastery, had been erected by the most skilled craftsmen, drifters who had awakened non-combat, S-class talents and dedicated themselves to contributing to the civilization of the Central Plains. Constructed using an indestructible metal forged from the rare Oregon mineral, the wall was smelted and molded through the fierce interplay of steel and fire by master blacksmiths. Its erection took an astonishing 73 years, with the final structure reaching a staggering height of 9,448 meters and spanning a vast 10,000 square kilometers, making it large enough to be considered an empire. All the 7 kingdoms and 2 empires of the Central Plain had come together and relinquished this land, for none of them could breach the impregnable barrier. Yet, the mystery persisted. How had the Academy's founder crossed the Sea of Crimson Shadows to this island in the first place? Over time, the advent of flying ships and teleportation had made access to the island feasible, but the Academy's origins remained shrouded in enigma. Another perplexing aspect was the sheer height of the walls and their true purpose. Whether to protect the interior from the Crimson Shadows or perhaps the reverse, remained a matter of speculation. Northern looked at the wall with a discerning eye, his thoughts racing. It looks like it's protecting the inside from the outside, or is it the outside from the inside? He mused, his voice laced with intrigue. As the ship touched down safely on the round platform, a harsh blast from the horn shattered the tranquil silence, its piercing sound nearly rupturing Northern's eardrums. While he instinctively clamped his hands over his ears, the young lady beside him remained unfazed, stepping forward as automatic steps arranged themselves from the deck to the platform's surface. One of the air attendants announced, "First stop, Milgard Academy. If you are for Milgard Academy, please retrieve your luggage from the cargo hold." As the attendant's voice echoed, several people emerged from within the ship, clutching their bags. That was when Northern realized that he was not the only prospective student who had embarked on this journey. Where have they all been? He wondered, before concluding that, like himself, they had likely remained secluded in their quarters during the voyage. Scanning the disembarking passengers, he failed to spot the alabaster-haired child and the protector he had encountered at the Citadel. At least he had Annette, the twins, and Gilbert on his side, a realization that brought him an odd sense of comfort that he promptly tried to shake off. As Northern made his way towards the cargo hold to retrieve his luggage, Gilbert approached him with a smile, lifting one of the bags. "This is yours, right?" he inquired amiably. "Ah, yes it is," Northern responded, slightly taken aback. "Thank you," he added, politely taking the bag from Gilbert's grasp. Falling in line with the other passengers, Northern surveyed his surroundings. Most of his fellow travelers appeared to be between the ages of 14 and 16, except for the tiny figure who immediately caught his eye. The youth was not merely short in stature but also possessed blue hair and a cold, piercing gaze that hinted at a troubled disposition. To Northern, the boy seemed out of place, as if he wasn't supposed to be present. As Northern approached the cavity within the wall, he glanced around once more, but there was still no sign of Ruchesburg. While his absence did not perturb Northern, he had expected the individual who had invited him here to accompany him on the journey. If not, how could Ruchesburg possibly teleport them into a place he had never been? As Northern walked on, someone began matching his pace, and a boy greeted him with a slight bow of his head. "Good afternoon. My name is Ellis Ruthsworn." Northern regarded him with a deadpan expression, offering no response. "So what about you? What's your name?" Ellis pressed, undeterred by Northern's silence. Northern sighed inwardly. Can't he take a hint? Before answering curtly, "Northern." Ellis studied Northern intently as if expecting more information. "What?" Northern grumbled, growing impatient with the boy's scrutiny. "You must be from the imperial family," Ellis whispered conspiratorially. "Are you trying to hide your identity? Don't worry. Not everyone knows about the white hair of Lewingard Empire." Northern arched a brow, his expression puzzled. "I think you have the wrong person," he stated matter-of-factly before hastening his steps to put enough distance between him and the persistent Ellis as they entered the hallowed walls of the academy. What sprawled out before his eyes was a sight more grandiose than anything he had ever laid eyes upon, the magnificent Milgard Academy in all its glorious splendor. Chapter 19. The Academy, Part 2. Crossing the colossal walls, Northern's eyes widened in awe as he beheld not a mere school, but an entire city. Towering glass buildings stretched into the sky, piercing it with their spectacular beauty. Each structure was intricately and magnificently crafted, their sharp edges and sickening twists spiraling like an embrace into the clouds. Lush, radiant greenery filled some areas, carpeting the ground, while others were paved with pristine white marble, fit for monarchs and lords. People strolled along these marble paths, some lounging on benches amidst the verdant foliage, others gathered beneath the pink-blossomed trees, their movements aimless yet purposeful. What united them were their prestigious white and blue uniforms, as ancient robes were fashioned into a modern style, consisting of V-neck shirts tucked neatly into long white trousers that were adorned with blue stripes along the sides. Knee-high boots or sleek shoes were a matter of personal preference, while the V-neck shirts were worn as coats over the ensemble, either tucked in or allowed to flow freely. Some uniquely tied belts around their waists, creating a dashing blend of ancient Eastern and modern aesthetics. For the young women, the attire mirrored the men's, save for the flared skirts that barely grazed their knees. Northern observed everything keenly as the glass elevator carried him and other students down the wall and onto the grounds. Upon reaching the bottom, they were ushered into another office, where stern security officers took their rank cards and issued temporary school IDs. Afterward, they were led eastward, away from the main compound. Within minutes, they arrived at a deserted area beautiful and magnificent, yet pale in comparison to the grandeur of the Central Academy. Devoid of bustling students, it felt like a ghostly field. The students exchanged apprehensive glances as they silently followed the grim-faced officer leading them. Northern scanned the area, searching for Gilbert and the others, but they were nowhere to be seen. They must have been led elsewhere, perhaps to meet the academy officials, he mused. I wonder why we were brought here, too. Pushing aside his thoughts, Northern consciously followed the winding path. The eastern region was segregated by a large wall, not as tall as the academy's outer fortifications, but formidable nonetheless. Unlike the academy's brownish hue, this wall was stark white, with jagged spikes adorning its top. Beyond the walls were an array of smaller buildings, their architecture fine but insignificant compared to the main structures they had witnessed. They entered a building at the edge, nestled among the others, and found themselves in a broad, cozy yet chilly wooden hall. As everyone filed in, Murmurs rose, then slowly died down as the officer strode to the platform. He tapped the microphone twice, eliciting a deafening screech that commanded silence. "Attention! Entrance!" His voice was rough and curt, his presence demanding obedience and fear. "Welcome to the Academy. I understand most of you have not undergone the Second Awakening. Except for the nobles, I doubt any of you are equipped with the knowledge of rifts or drifters." He unfolded his arms and clasped them behind his back. "But that should be of no concern. The reason you are in this academy is to prevent you from walking, no matter how much you try. There are walls around to ensure you cannot walk into a rift." He pressed his lips for a moment, then continued, addressing them solemnly. "However, there will be a break point. No matter how much you resist the call, you will eventually have to heed it or you will go mad. Your incomplete soul core will break, and you'll become a being worse than even monsters, a soulless." The entrance voices rose in a clamor of murmurs, quickly quieting as the officer's stony gaze swept over them. "Of course, I am well aware that most of you are probably full-blown drifters. However, there are still some rookies in your ranks. You are in the academy to be equipped with the knowledge and training required for your Second Awakening. With 2 weeks of rigorous preparation, you will be armed with everything you need to know about rifts and finally thread into the realms of darkness to receive the true extent of your powers. May El guide and bless you." With that, he marched off the stage, leaving the students to themselves. For the first few seconds, confusion reigned. "What? That's it. Wait, are we supposed to? Won't we be allocated our rooms? This is so weird. Is it even okay for him to leave like that? Who are our instructors? This place is deserted." Several more voices were lost in the ocean of confused murmurs that spread through the hall. Meanwhile, Northern stood silently in a corner, observing everyone. Within a little time, people had already gathered in groups, talking as if they had completely forgotten why they were there. That is, for the Second Awakening and to become full-fledged students of the Academy. Seeing them brought to mind how comfortable humans could become with anything. But what bothered him the most were the Academy's intentions and the instructor's abrupt departure. Minutes passed into hours, and no one came. The students had already settled on the ground, conversing about various topics. Rich nobles were being filtered out, their lower-class counterparts frolicking around them, the divide painfully obvious from their actions. Northern would have loved to gather more information, but he wasn't interested at the moment. Something about the current situation felt unsettling. Or was he overthinking it? Maybe they just wanted to give everyone time to get accustomed to each other. He thought to himself, leaning against the wall and slowly closing his eyes. At that moment, a sudden tremor shook the entire place. Northern's heart trembled with fear, unsure if it was merely the shock of how abruptly it happened or the fact that his intuition had been correct. The students sitting on the ground looked around, some immediately standing up with caution etched on their faces. Something was undoubtedly amiss. Northern lowered his head and noticed a glinting white circle spreading across the wooden floor of the hall. His eyes widened as he traced its perimeter, first walking, then running toward the platform as the white circle began to glow brighter. Somehow, it reminded him of a certain teleportation spell that had been used on him before. "Teleportation," he muttered, squinting at the circle. As the word left his lips, a bright light shot forth, bathing the hall in an ethereal glow. By the time its radiance faded, no one remained. Absolutely no one. Chapter 20. Nonsense Deceit. A somber man walked into the office of a nearby building and sat down. He placed his palm over his face as an exasperated sigh escaped his mouth. Minutes later, as he stared into oblivion mulling over what just happened, the door opened. Another man, though older, walked into the office and sat down before him, a table separating both of them. "It must not feel good, right? What? Lying to a bunch of kids?" The officer raised his head to look the man in the eyes. No, it did not feel even a bit good. One thing he and the man had in common was the uniform they wore. It was more like a military uniform, but it was white with black stripes running from the shoulder to the legs. The man had a grim expression on his face as he bitterly twisted his mouth. I don't know what to say. As you already know, in this world, we are at the bottom of the food chain. We are meant to grovel at the mercy of the instructors and carry out whatever orders are given to us. That is the reality of our situation. The officer bit his lip, then opened his mouth after a few seconds of silence. It's not even that. He looked up at the man again. Sir Fergo, something is fishy. I can smell it. I don't know why we were asked to lie to the kids or why they suddenly disappeared, but I can tell that something is wrong. And it will do us 100 times better to pay no attention to it. Face your work, Holland. Holland looked down and bit his lips in frustration once more. Damn! He smacked his hand on the table. Fergo simply watched him and shook his head. Then he stood up a couple of seconds later, bid farewell and left the office, leaving the young officer to drown in the regret of ever deciding to accept a job at the academy. There were several ranks of profession in the academy. The lowest rank workers were responsible for menial jobs such as cleaning. Officers are a set of low-rank drifters that work with the protectors to preserve the security of the school. After them were the junior instructors, senior instructors, heads of department, administrators, the vice principal, and finally the principal. Fergo had wished to at least become a junior instructor, but because of his low-class talent and insufficient rift experience, he was unfit for the job. Hence he had to settle for what he could get. To take care of his sickly mother and educate his sister in a common school, he became an officer. So far the job had been rewarding, except for the times they were bullied by junior instructors. Working with the protectors was a privilege, and if Holland had to put it into words, he'd say the junior instructors were just jealous of their privilege. After all, a protector is an amazing rank with prestige. To leave one's life and family in order to protect the border of the continent is the highest level of service a man could give. And service at such a level was respected and appreciated by all. Holland struggled to survive in an environment like this, especially when the senior instructors assigned him a series of chores like this. He should have never been the one to pass this message, Holland knew. Whatever it was the academy was planning, it was not of general knowledge, so there was no way he'd be asked to do it. Usually, when it was related to the students, the academy kept it confidentially between instructors. Holland was sure this was an act of disobedience. Thinking about it, a strange fire began to burn in his chest. He wanted to investigate the matter, see what it was about, and report it to the authorities, even if it was to spite the instructor that had put him up to it. Holland felt sorry for the entrance, but what's done is done. Wherever you all are, I hope you survive. Under the crimson sky, the scorched earth was littered with mangled corpses. Massive, beastly bodies with matted fur and savage claws lay slashed open, their entrails spilling out onto the muddy ground. Among them were the shattered shells of colossal crabs, their legs twisted at unnatural angles and their shattered pincers still dripping with viscous fluids. Northern's eyes fluttered open to a landscape of unimaginable carnage. He found himself surrounded by the gruesome remnants of a brutal war between two monstrous species. The air was choked with the metallic tang of blood and the sickly stench of rotting flesh. Rivulets of dark, coagulated blood snaked through the turf, soaking the trampled grass. Severed limbs and severed heads were strewn about like grotesque debris. A heavy, oppressive silence engulfed the ravaged land. Flies swarmed over wounds, their droning wings amplifying the eerie stillness. Northern's shocked breaths sounded deafening amidst the deathly quiet. He gazed around, horrified and transfixed by the nightmarish vision before him. The sheer brutality on display was beyond comprehension. What primal hatred, he wondered, could have fueled such ruthless carnage? How many lives had been mercilessly extinguished on this cursed plot of land? Stumbling to his feet, Northern cast his eyes over the battlefield graveyard and shuddered at the harrowing sight. A voice interrupted him. A different kind of voice, one that sounded familiar. You have entered a rift. Northern frowned at the runes that appeared as the voice delivered its message. A rift. The officer had told them they had 2 weeks to prepare for a rift, and all of a sudden they were transported into one. This is nonsense. Why bother lying? If they were going to send them into a rift, why not just send them? Was it to prevent students from protesting? But lying for such reasons seemed childish and unnecessary to Northern. Plus, that teleportation circle that he saw, the light, he was sure, was the same kind of light that teleported him into the airship. If so, was the former Academy principal a part of this? That line of thought seemed plausible to Northern. What had just happened bothered him a lot, but there was something bigger on his mind. He was in a rift, with no solid knowledge or training on rift education whatsoever, and no weapon. He was also unaware of the tier of rift he was currently in, and he had to survive somehow. Faced with such reality, Northern's whole body began trembling.